Hey, good evening, fellow citizens. The town clerk has informed me that we have a quorum, so we will now start the 7th night of the Fall Town Meeting 2022. The first thing we are going to address tonight is a motion made by Ms. Jocelyn Murphy and seconded by Lee Selwyn to defer hearing Article 37, which relates to hiring a consultant to do a school budget review until the first thing at our next session on Thursday, December 8th. To do this, we will need a majority vote. Drop it down.
Okay, we got 147 yes, 11 no, 13 abstentions.
The motion passes with 147 yes, 11 no, and 13 abstentions. So we will now move on to the first article of business for tonight, Article 31. Article 31 seeks a bylaw change of Section 3.14, and it sets out the responsibility and authority of the Commission of Diversity Inclusion and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, including a revision of the complaint process. The main motion is found on Supplement 6, page 1 through 11. This was on the Night 3 supplement. There was also a motion to refer. Oh, let me go back. I apologize. The main motion was filed by Mr. Green. He is the mover, and Mr. Gordon has seconded it. There is a motion to refer, which has been filed by Mr. Lepson and seconded by Mr. Lebovitz. It is found on Supplement 5, page 1, on the Night 2 supplements. This is a motion to refer the subject matter of Article 31 back to consideration by the CDICR. All right, Mr. Green. Oh, actually, I also need to do a language change, because what would town meeting be without that? On the front page of the motion, the language "to see if the town will amend" should be substituted with "moved that." So it reads, "moved that the town amend the general bylaws." And at the end, the phrase "or act on anything relative thereto" is crossed out. Now we turn to you, Mr. Green, as the petitioner. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good evening. I'm Bernard Green, a member of the Select Board and one of the petitioners of Warrant Article 31, establishing a discrimination complaint process. I was also one of the original drafters of Bylaw 3.14 in 2014 that created the Office and Commission on Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. Let me start by stating that a town like Brookline does in fact need a good process for receiving and resolving complaints of discrimination, but it must be a sensible, workable, fair, and effective process. Unfortunately, the June 15 meeting of the Diversity Commission and subsequent meetings showed that the Commission is not willing to offer such a complaint process as requested by town meeting. Rather, their intention is to go for broke with their original proposed amendment to Bylaw 3.14, submitted as Warrant Article 12 to the May 2022 town meeting, even though that town meeting asked them to fix multiple problems and return to this town meeting with an improved warrant article. They refused, and I submitted warrant article 31. Regarding the motion to refer, the rejected warrant article 12 would have created an adversarial and punitive quasi-judicial process for handling complaints of discrimination that was out of character with the town and was rejected by town meeting. The commission's refusal to fix warrant article 12 is just one of the many reasons that the idea of referral again to the same commission is so inappropriate. Don't allow further delay. Brookline needs a serious complaint process now, and vote no on the motion to refer. Okay, back on track. Let's start with a roadmap for the main discussion. Warrant Article 31 is a complex article, to be sure, but at its root, it has two basic and easy to understand purposes. The first and primary purpose is to create a plain and straightforward process for addressing complaints of discrimination. The secondary purpose is to clarify the commission's role in supporting diversity, equity, inclusion, and good community relations in Brookline. First, regarding the complaint process. Under Warrant Article 31, the Diversity Office will be the primary forum for complaints of discrimination. The Diversity Office, comprised of Dr. Lloyd Jeleno and a highly trained and professional staff, currently plays that role. And the commission, in fact, is currently not involved in any serious sense in a complaint process, despite being given a role in the current iteration of Bylaw 3.14. Complaints can now be filed with the Diversity Office using a form on the office's webpage. There are also specific forms for Asian American hate incidents and forms for complaints related to police-civilian interactions. These forms will likely continue to be used under Warrant Article 31. It's up to the director. There's also a robust complaint process for town and school employees who are outside the jurisdiction of the director and the commission. The complaint process in Warrant Article 31 is laid out in detail on the summary of the complaint process document that I circulated on the listserv Monday morning. It has 6 possible options that the director can use to decide whether to either handle a complaint in-house, such as one that lends itself to mediation, restorative justice, or another non-adversarial resolution, or whether the complaint should be referred to a more robust adversarial process, such as the often maligned and slow-moving MCAD, or the federal EEOC, the Mass Attorney General's Office, or another agency. None of these agencies are fast, but that's because they emphasize slow-moving due process for complainants and respondents. The director could also bring in the Brookline Police Department for racially motivated assaults or harassments or bullying. The police department's youth resource officers currently work with the schools to handle such incidents impacting students, and there are quite a few. Or the director could engage the select board, which can hold a hearing and determine whether to revoke a business's license, as we did with the Tam Kosher Chinese restaurant on Harvard Street a few years ago, which is way more effective way to remedy discrimination than a paltry $300 fine. Second purpose, community relations. The secondary purpose of Warrant Article 31 is the community relations role of the commission. That purpose requires that the commission develop credibility in the community and knowledge and expertise to help Brookline continue to be a diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. This role has its origins in the original 2014 warrant article that established the Office and Commission on Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. You can find those important responsibilities of the commission outlined in Warrant Article 31 at Part 3.14.3 in subparts A, regarding the commission's general responsibilities, subpart B, the commission's responsibilities to use its knowledge and expertise to support the complaint process on issues of civil and human rights and community relations, and Subpart C, the Commission's responsibility to develop the credibility, the knowledge, and expertise needed to carry out its community relations functions. Responsibilities, which bylaw 3.14 always expected of the Commission, but something that was never developed by the Commission in any serious way. In summary, before the moderator tells me to summarize, Warrant Article 31 appropriately utilizes our current professional Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Lloyd Gelno, and the trained, specialized staff of his office instead of volunteer residents for complaints of discrimination, and it works very well. Warrant Article 31 also gives the Commission authority to serve as the town's community relations body and positively engage with the town, its residents, and visitors to help make the town a community that strongly stands for diversity, equity, inclusion, and harmonious community relations. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Deborah Brown. Ms. Brown, could you identify yourself, the precinct you live in, and welcome back to town meeting?
Thank you, moderator. My name is Deborah Brown, and I live in Precinct 1. And if the moderator would just allow me a couple of seconds, I wanted to just very briefly acknowledge Roger Lipson's many, many years of service in Brookline, as well as being the president of the board for the Brookline Improvement Coalition. And, you know, we don't get a lot of opportunities to thank people for their service, but I really need to do that. So thank you, moderator.
You have 8 minutes plus the 15 seconds you just, so go for it.
Okay. So my name is Deborah Brown, and I am a member of the Discrimination Complaint Committee. By background, I'm an attorney with decades of environmental and civil rights experience. I've heard hundreds of claims against discrimination, and I understand some of the complexities. But I'm here to ask you to vote to refer Warrant Article 31 back to the newly invigorated Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. And I want to add that we will continue to work with Town Council to incorporate legal standards and best practices into the regulations. So let me start with 3 issues that I have here. One is that the Complaint Committee was actually in the process of revising Warrant Articles 12 and 13. We were doing the work. We have an opportunity to work together to produce a policy protective of residents, guests, employees, and the town in general. Lastly, Warrant Article 31 has not gone through any kind of detailed review by subject matter experts, and that alone is reason to refer it. So why should we care so much about 31? Discrimination is real. I looked at some equal employment opportunity data, and they had looked at about 700,000 cases, and 63% of workers who filed discrimination complaints eventually lost their jobs. 67% of those people were disabled. And 40% of the some that actually filed complaints were retaliated against. And guess what? The majority of them were women. Now, Brookline's not without its problems. I encourage you to read the town's diversity report and its racial equity audit assessment, and for that matter, the school's equity report. So what's our goal? Brookline should have a discrimination complaint policy that will take all available steps to promptly, thoroughly, and impartially investigate and address complaints of discrimination, including harassment or other discriminatory conduct. We need complaint guidelines that should be flexible enough to promote a thorough, impartial, and effective process, and something I would argue akin to what MCAD has. ODICR should always respond to complaints, reports, and allegations of discrimination in order to stop this prohibited conduct. It needs to prevent its recurrence and to address any lingering effects in town. So what happened following town meeting? Having served on the committee, I can tell you, we got back to work. And yeah, some people's feelings were hurt about this. And they were like, nope, we got to stop. Let's just stick with what we have. But we have, and we will continue to revisit the previous version, despite what petitioners say. Beginning in June, members of the committee worked with, talked to other civil rights commissions. We collaborated with town council to develop regulations. Yes, we were in the process of developing regulations. HR, Human Resources, and ODICR's directors were in the room throughout the process. And lastly, petitioners have never sought to work with us. There's also some inaccuracies here. If it takes years to file a complaint with MCAD, if it takes at least 9 months to file a complaint with the state, and I will tell you right now that the Department of Justice is they're selective in how they pick cases. And so what you might end up with is a person who literally has no remedies. The phrase community relations has and continues to be used by other civil rights offices to describe how communities address tensions associated with discrimination. It is built into issues of discrimination and should not be treated as a separate. Why were 12 and 13 referred back? You know what? There's some thorny issues as they relate to subpoenas and penalty authority. But with town council, we felt like that we would get to a good place. So what are some of the things that are wrong with warrant article 31? The way it's drafted, it actually limits your civil rights, because the idea is if it gets too thorny, then you send it somewhere else. It doesn't treat residents, employees, and visitors equally. It would put routine disputes on par with discrimination complaints. It limits the commissioner's authority. It places too much power, we believe, in the hands of the director. It would give select board the unique opportunity to appoint the commission's chair. Now, ODICR is a regulatory commission in some ways. I want you to think about planning. I want you to think about zoning, historic preservation, food safety, and for that matter, some of the public works. If you do something wrong, they intercede. And that is the purpose of this office. I would also like to add that warrant article 31 really should do a better job of describing the protected classes. I think that it misses the point when it doesn't provide any information about whether you're talking about employment, housing, credit, mortgage. These are all important things for people who are filing a complaint to know. Some of the language in warrant article 31 falls into social engineering. What is a harmonious resolution of incidents? What does that really mean? And it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but that kind of vague language could be problematic. There's no reference in there to deterrence or a way to enact deterrence. It offers no clear remedies. Town employees actually have fewer rights to complain about discrimination than other employees under this version. We would argue that the rights of school employees and students are restricted, especially as compared when you read the MCAD laws. The timeliness of complaints should track with MCAD, so people don't lose their opportunity to even raise their complaint to the other agency. So what are we actually expecting? And what
Could you
do
please
we
summarize,
believe?
Ms. Brown?
Yes, you
You've
know
got
what?
about 30 seconds.
I'm at the end. I'm at
All
the
right.
end. I've got 5 bullets. So we need a complaint policy that does more than acknowledge that they received it. We need someone that is willing to review it carefully, to investigate, to thoroughly investigate, to respond to all of the parties and take the necessary action and make sure that it doesn't happen again. We would ask that you refer warrant Article 31 because there are entirely too many problems with it as drafted. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead and speak, Mr. Gordon. I think we could hear you if you do speak.
Yeah, I can see he's on mute, but we cannot hear him. You want to check his mic or something? Or,
Uh,
what you didn't hear was, one more time.
Okay, let's try it again. Okay, there seems to be an issue with your mic. I will go to the next speaker on the pro side, then against. If you want to try to fiddle with your microphone and see if that helps. Otherwise, could Mr. Gordon call in and be heard? Otherwise, if your mic ends up not working at all, call in at the helpline number.
Let's see, does that work?
Oh, there he is.
Thank you very much. We will start again. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Neil Gordon, Precinct 1 Town Meeting Member and a member of the Advisory Committee, speaking for a unanimous Advisory Committee. The absence of favorable action on last May's Article 12 did not obviate the need for a reasonable and workable discrimination complaint process. Article 31 as amended meets that need. Bylaw Article 314 was established in its current form, but for a significant 2019 amendment by vote of town meeting 8 years ago. That vote established the Commission on Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations and the related office. In 2019 town meeting, with some trepidation, gave CDICR the authority to investigate complaints of discrimination, prepare written findings, and recommend appropriate action. Recognizing well-articulated flaws, our 2019 vote came with a 1-year, then 2-year effectiveness delay, expecting that CDICR would bring a viable substitute complaint procedure back to town meeting. CDICR's proposal, with among other flaws, its contentious provisions of subpoena power and the questionable authority to impose fines, came to us last May. After robust debate, and as recommended by the Advisory Committee, CTO&S, and the Select Board, we referred a flawed Article 12 back to CDICR, after which the 2019 amendment went into effect. CDICR's commissioners on the record have said they would just resubmit last May's Article 12 to a future town meeting, more specifically, next May. They said that they would, and I quote, double down, unquote. Learning the commissioner's intent, petitioners proposed what's now Article 31. An advisory committee subcommittee met 3 times, and the full advisory committee took up Article 31 twice, focusing on the following. First, we considered the framework of petitioners' proposed changes, primarily the limiting of CDICR's authority to investigate complaints, in particular with respect to town and school employees. We agree that duplicative pathways for the review of discrimination complaints are problematical, in large part because of the number of employees subject to collective bargaining, and further due to the legal exposures to the town of potential conflicting testimony and conflicting findings in the same case. Complaints involving town employees should be reviewed and investigated solely by the town's Human Resources Department, by the school's Human Resources Office, or in the case of complaints involving police officers, through the police complaint procedure. We also reviewed petitioner's initial proposal to expand the scope of CDICR's and, more significantly, the office's authority to investigate non-discrimination complaints consistent with the office's community relations role. Community relations are fundamental to the charter of CDICR and the office, yet the town has no designated authority to receive complaints related to community tensions. The advisory committee's amended article, granting such authority when deemed significant to the well-being of the town and at the request of the town administrator, is appropriate and necessary. Lastly, we considered the testimony by CDICR commissioners that stressed the lack of teeth in Article 31, subpoena power and the authority to impose fines among the very items we rejected 6 months ago. Despite not having seen the advisory committee's latest amended and arguably improved motion, CDICR, without a written report, is recommending no action on Article 31. But we referred Article 12 back to them to resolve what we perceived as significant flaws in their work. Given their intent to bring back essentially the same flawed proposal next May, in the commissioner's clear recorded words, to quote again, quote, double down, unquote, and despite the equally clear will of town meeting to the contrary, the advisory committee sees little reason to not act favorable on Article 31 as amended now. The unanimous advisory committee recommends no action on the motion to refer and joins with CTO&S and the select board in recommending favorable action on Article 31 as amended. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wu?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Moderator. First, Chi Wu, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7. First, a conflict of interest disclosure. I'm a newly appointed member of the Commission on Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. I'm also the chair of the Brookline Asian American Family Network, which advocates for the largest racial minority in town, the Asian American community, and would be greatly affected negatively by Article 31's process. So my 3 minutes. I'm urging you to vote for referral, and if that fails, against Article 31 for 3 reasons. Number one, the Commission on Diversity's Complaint Process Committee spent a lot of time, about 2 years, crafting a discrimination complaints process that was robust, meaningful, and effective. Now, last May, town meeting said, keep working on it by referring the CDICR's article back to it. So the CDICR, the Complaints Committee, is doing exactly that. They're working on it. But now you have a completely new article that upends that process, that turns it from an investigatory and remedial process to protect the rights of residents and guests subject to discrimination, and instead switches it to conciliation and harmonious resolution of complaints. That's the language from the article. In other words, the focus of Article 31 is on making the complainant make nice with whomever discriminated against them. It reduces discrimination to interpersonal squabbles, not serious violations of the law. Think about it in the context of a sexual harassment complaint. Article 31 solution is to mediate, to get the parties to make nice, and to have a mutually acceptable resolution, instead of what should be done, discipline the harasser. Harmonious reconciliation with a sexual harasser, that's not justice. Now, the proposed complaint process does rely on MCAD, EEOC, and the AG's office for serious issues, but as we've heard, those agencies and offices are seriously backlogged and overburdened with delays of potentially years. And as we know, justice delayed is justice denied. Number two, Article 31 would overburden an already overworked staff at the Office of Diversity. I work with this staff in my role at BaFin, in particular the deputy director. They are wonderful, skilled, smart, and effective. They're also overworked and overstretched. Now you want to add a caseload of dealing with discrimination complaints? Why would you do that when you have a group of skilled volunteers? Both Deborah and I are lawyers with decades of experience, willing to shoulder the load. Now, the article does give the director some budget to retain an independent consultant, but note what it doesn't provide: an additional staff member to process and investigate these complaints. Now, number three, Article 31 gives the director all these new responsibilities, but no power to do anything about the bad or illegal behavior. All the director can do is mediate, provide findings to the select board, and make referrals. The director can't take specific concrete action, can't even express an opinion. To quote from the article, the director shall explain to the complainant that neither the director nor town council can provide a legal advice or express an opinion as to the merits of the complainant's case. So the director can do some jawboning and some fact fighting, but has no power to provide a remedy or even to decide who is right or wrong. It's toothless. The focus of Article 31 is getting along, discussion of respectful human interactions and civility. And one of the first changes is the addition of amicable community relations. But sometimes doing justice is the opposite of making nice. It's about speaking truth to power. That makes waves. Survivors of harassment and discrimination don't need to be told to make nice. They need justice and redress. I'm urging you to vote for referral. Let the Commission on Diversity and the Complaints Committee finish its job, and if that fails, against Article 31. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Van Scoyac?
Thank you, Madam
have 3 minutes.
Moderator. Thank you, Madam Moderator. I am John Van Scoyac, speaking for the Select Board in support of the Advisory Committee motion under Article 31. The Select Board's vote was 2-1 in favor with 2 abstentions. It's no secret that fixing what was broken in the 2019 version of the town's diversity and inclusion bylaw hasn't been easy. But after a stalemate of 3 years, tonight we have an opportunity to improve the bylaw for the good of the town. Article 31 gives Brookline the robust but disciplined discrimination complaint process that the people of Brookline need and deserve. I wish to acknowledge my colleague Bernard Green and those who collaborated with him on Article 31 for getting us this far through hard work and openness to the opinions of others. They engaged critics of their work with courtesy and respect, with positive results. They deserve our thanks. Also deserving of thanks are members of the Complaint Committee under CDICR who have for 3 years been working on their version of a bylaw fix, even though the majority of the CDICR as a whole have said repeatedly they will bring the bylaw, the flawed bylaw, back to town meeting in 2023 unchanged. Can you imagine what it feels like to be on the complaint committee doing that work, knowing that members of the CDICR to whom you will have to hand over your work have already said their intent is to bring it back unchanged? Here's hoping tonight we put differences aside so that Brookline can move forward. So why do I say Article 31 offers a robust but disciplined discrimination complaint process? First, it is robust because Article 31 clearly maps out a process for addressing and hopefully resolving discrimination complaints. Article 31 carves out roles for both the Director of Diversity and Inclusion and the Diversity and Inclusion Commission, with the commission serving as a sort of backstop for complainants who choose to go beyond the best efforts of the office director. Second, Article 31 is disciplined because it recognizes the limits that necessarily apply to a locally based discrimination complaint process. As for those limits, here's what Article 31 thankfully doesn't do. It doesn't create double jeopardy for town and school employees who have already or are already covered under separate complaint processes, and it doesn't invest the CDICR with the power to issue subpoenas and levy fines. Those limitations are a strength. They make the town's anti-discrimination bylaw a tool that is more likely to be used, while at the same time reducing the risk of entangling local citizen volunteers in lawsuits and court challenges. In addition to robust and disciplined, I'll close by using a final word to describe Article 31, hope. Hope for a future CDICR that lives the words of its mission as stated in the bylaw, quote, to support a welcoming environment by modeling and encouraging civility, kindness, cooperation, tolerance, and respect among and by all persons, and by advancing, promoting, and advocating for the human and civil rights of all, end quote. The select board, by 2-1 vote with 2 abstentions, supports a yes vote on Article 31. And to get there, you have to reject the referral motion.
Thank you. Mr. Lepson, you have 4 minutes.
All right. Good. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good evening, everyone. I'm Bob Lepson, Town Meeting Member from Precinct 9, and one of the co-chairs of the newly reinvigorated Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, also known as the CDICR. And I'm asking that Town Meeting please vote favorable action on the referral motion before you. And if that fails, please vote no action on warrant Article 31. By voting in favor of the referral motion, Town Meeting will authorize the CDICR's Complaint Process Committee to finish its work on revising the town's official complaint process that they began more than 2 years ago. Let me begin tonight by first stating that I'm confused. Just confused, very confused by warrant Article 31 and the reasons why Select Board Member Green and Town Meeting members Rosenthal and Daley Kavanaugh decided to draft and submit this revision of the town's bylaw for Town Meeting's consideration. I'm confused as to why they didn't first approach the Commission and the Office for Diversity so that we could all work together on a much needed and overdue revision of the town's official complaint process. I'm confused as to why petitioners neglected to extend an invitation or let anyone on the CDICR or the Complaint Process Committee know that there would be public hearings on Article 31 held by the AC or CTONS. Now, we've heard that the Commission and the Complaint Process Committee said that they had no interest in going back to the drawing board following Town Meeting voting down their proposed complaint process revision this past spring, and that the committee and the commission was simply planning on resubmitting that very same article for reconsideration. Yes, feeling frustrated after working for more than 2 years on the revision, that was the initial response, underlined initial. But soon thereafter, that attitude changed and the Complaint Process Committee reconvened and began to work closely with Town Council to attempt to create a meaningful process consistent with the language of Arthur Conquest's revised complaint process warrant Article 24, which was passed by Town Meeting in the fall of 2019 and is now part of the current bylaw. I'm confused by the fact that even though the petitioners are well aware of the huge backlog of cases at MCAD and EEOC and the Attorney General's office, that their proposed complaint process relies heavily on these agencies. Of course, these agencies are critically important when dealing with serious discrimination issues, but their forums become somewhat useless if complainants are forced to wait years to have their cases adjudicated. Per the Boston Globe, MCAD had more than a 1,400 case backlog as of this past April. I'm also confused as to why the petitioners seem to want to limit potential choice of how and where complainants choose to address the discrimination issues. Why should town and school employees be forced only to go to their respective HR directors? Independence can be critical, and if we pass warrant Article 31, our town employees could be prevented from exercising an important freedom of choice. I'm confused as to why petitioners did not even attempt to incorporate, and I know this is controversial, to incorporate subpoena powers or fines in the proposal, even though the cities of Cambridge and Newton have those authorities, and as far as I'm aware, they are perfectly legal and consistent with Massachusetts law. On a slightly different note, I'm also confused as to why petitioners felt that the select board should be the ones to appoint the chair of the CDICR, when as far as I know, they don't do that for any other board or commission in town. Now, several weeks
Mr.
back,
Lepson, could you please summarize?
I've got two quick paragraphs. This is important here. Several weeks back, I contacted Select Board Member Green and had a perfectly nice and respectful conversation with him. During that discussion, I politely asked him to consider not moving Article 31 and instead working with the Complaint Process Committee and the Commission itself, and then having us jointly submit a revised complaint process to the 2023 Springtown meeting that we all agreed upon. He politely declined and suggested to me that I could always submit a referral motion to town meeting and instead have town meeting decide how to proceed on this issue. So taking Select Board Member Green's wise suggestion, that is what I have done. And with that in mind, I urge all of you, all of us, to please vote favorable action on the referral motion. And if that fails, please join me and a unanimous CDICR who voted 8-0 against warrant Article 31 and vote no action on 31 as it currently stands. There are way too many problems with this proposal, and to have this formally enshrined as a town bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenthal, you will be up next and we'll have 5 minutes, but before I address that, one of the things that is extremely frustrating to town meeting members and about town meeting is that you do not get to directly address somebody to talk back and make a counterpoint if you think they have made a mistake. Everything has to come through the moderator, for example. It can be a fault with the system, and this happens often, and it is frustrating, but sometimes you just have to hope that somebody else gets to correct that mistake, and or that we get to you to correct that mistake or what you perceive as a mistake. Mr. Rosenthal, you have 5 minutes.
Not sure why my, something happened to my speech. Okay,
What's that?
I'm on all right, I think. You hear me?
Yes,
Yes, you hear me.
yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Marty Rosenthal, Precinct 9, former Select Board member, and speaking for PAX, addressing just 2 global guerrilla issues, and I'm a co-petitioner. Number 1 is the duplicative procedures against town employees, including unpaid ones like all of you, and referring it again back to the commission. 2 Select Board members abstained on both, saying the largest proposed change is community disruption complaints. And Ms. Schaefer's excellent warrant site also misses my first issue, saying that 31 moves from the commission complaints involving town officials to HR, police, or schools. And the commission 100% ignores and downright obfuscates guerrilla issue number 1, saying May's referral was primarily for subpoenas and fines, and that 31 limits people's civil rights by restricting their ability to file complaints in a neutral forum. I'll get back later to the neutral forum issue. We actually have existing procedures that are tried, true, and professional. Slide 1, please. Now, thank you. Slide 1 is up already. Last week I sent you HR's process, and this is the cover sheet. And slide 2, please. It actually has teeth. And you know, I've sent this all to you. I know this is hard to read. I didn't realize it would be so small. As to their jurisdiction, slide 3, please. So the point is that there is a robust process. Like the police process, it has careful due process. After 3 years, the commission hasn't yet discussed tiny things like burden of proof or appeals. 31 ends the duplication and its many legal issues like for union employees. I recently talked with a large Brookline union leader, a large leader, a large union leader of a Brookline union, and asked 2 questions, essentially. Do you have any thoughts on the commission investigating your members? The answer, we'd see them in court or let the town bargain for that. And then I asked, well, what kind of salary increase might they get to accept commission jurisdiction? Answer, the federal government could not afford that salary increase. Recently, PCAC also criticized the duplicative process for complaints against police. So on the referral issue, going back to the commission again, they said in 2019, they didn't have the necessary background to effectively carry out the proposed changes, and they might need to resign. CTOS called May's Article 12 a quasi-judicial process that depends on part-time volunteers who might be close to issues and have opinions they could not put aside. A new commission member who last month nonetheless voted, I thought it was only 6-0, to oppose 31, said, without more resources, I wouldn't trust this group the way it is right now to deliver a fair result that would be enforceable. You cannot be both a player and an umpire, a cop and a judge, or like these commissioners, partisan, passionate advocates and impartial adjudicators. I've actively supported a more forceful commission since my select board years, and though they'll disbelieve me, I welcome their anti-racism energy and passion, but they are simply not open-minded or even-handed, nor in general must they be, I believe, with good intent. Even in general, I believe with good intentions, they exaggerate Brookline's racial and policing negativism, thus building walls, not bridges, and telling people of color to stay away from here. Another example, their 2020 support for town meeting defunding any litigation, they said merely, we disagree with town council's opinion that town meeting does not have this power. They don't cite anything, they just say that. And by my last Thursday incivility email, one of their complaint committee members calls me an interloping racist fraud. I have a thick skin, so I don't care. But Maya Angelou said, when people show you who they are, believe them. The Mass Declaration of Rights says it's the right of every citizen to be tried by judges as impartial as the lot of humanity will admit. In 2014, Stanley Spiegel was accused by Mr. Alston of racism. HR investigated and exonerated him. If you had been accused, but it went to the commission, how would you have felt? But they tonight could get a complaint, and that's one of the problems with referral. For 3 years, they've ignored almost all the concerns, like Bob Lepson said last week, as to why Article 12 was referred back to them. He says town meeting objected to it primarily because it included subpoenas and penalty power. In fact, those were only two issues the only two issues they've discussed all summer and all fall. And they
Could you
intend to
please summarize, Mr. Rosenthal?
Yeah, I'm getting there. Thank you. And they intend to keep both of them. The CTOS referral motion listed 7 significant issues, and none of them have been discussed. This is not a failure to communicate. It's a zero-sum disagreement. 2 roads diverge in this woods, and you have to choose which one to take. I sent the transcript of 3 of them calling May's referral simply white supremacy. So in closing, Pete Seeger said, when will we ever learn? And Gerald Ford almost said, our long Brookline nightmare must end. I'm not big on optimism or pessimism, but as William Arthur Ward said, the pessimist complains about the wind and the optimist expects it to change. The realist adjusts the sails. Finally, slide 4, please. For the hopeful thinking about referral, here's what Ben Franklin said about being hopeful. Again, advocates cannot be adjudicators. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lebovitz, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Alec Lebovitz, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8. First, I want to thank the petitioners of Warrant Article 31 for all the work they've done in bringing this article before us. There are certainly contributions worth considering in Warrant Article 31. However, I strongly believe that adopting it this evening would be a mistake. With the referral of Warrant Article 12 and 13, Town Meeting asked the CDICR to revisit their proposal to address the valid concerns that were raised in May. And let's be perfectly clear on this point. That is what the CDICR is doing right now. They have made it clear, listening to the membership tonight and the chair, that they have no intention of simply resubmitting Warrant Article 12 and 13, despite the claims that have been made by the petitioners. I believe it makes sense for us to wait until CDICR can make their final revised proposal. And in fact, I would hope that the petitioners of Warrant Article 31 could engage with this process. so that ultimately we can consider the strongest possible article next May. But denying the commission the time we gave them in their charge so that we can implement a process which they are unanimously opposed to tonight would not be right and would likely result in troubled implementation at best. In terms of the design of the process created by Warrant Article 31, I have some serious concerns about this. For one thing, Warrant Article 31 dramatically curtails the authority of the commission to the point that they have essentially no agency in the proposed discrimination review process. Instead, nearly all discretionary authority is vested with the diversity director. And while our town staff can be counted on to be excellent at their jobs, we cannot expect one individual to never make a mistake or rest the pressure of an entire public process on one person. Additionally, a strong appeals process is necessary in any complaint process to ensure that complainants' due process is protected and that they receive a fair hearing. Unfortunately, Warrant Article 31, as written, allows the director to overrule any appeals ruling issued by the CDICR if it conflicts with the director's initial finding. This effectively isolates all decision-making in the process with the director, barring a contravening vote from an already overburdened select board. No other town regulatory board has this kind of relationship with a corresponding departmental director, who it should be noted is already a standing CDICR board member. The petitioners have not presented a compelling reason as to why the CDICR should be stripped of nearly all authority and relegated to a purely advisory role that can be ignored. Would town meeting not reflexively object to such an extreme proposal if it targeted the planning board, the Parks and Recreation Commission, or any other similar town body? The petitioners even proposed to remove the ability of the CDICR to elect its own chair. To what end? How can we expect a positive outcome when the body charged with overseeing this process is stripped bare and left powerless? The petitioners seek to end split jurisdiction over complaints by barring town employees from the new process. Warrant Article 31 would limit town employees to only seeking recourse through the town's HR complaint process. This makes sense on paper, but unfortunately does not reflect our current reality. The HR process has already lost the confidence of at least one of our municipal employee unions due to alleged repeated failures. This can be seen in the letter from the police union president that was circulated on the listserv by Select Board Member Sandman.
Could you please finish up? Your time is up.
Absolutely. 1 minute, Madam Moderator, just concluding. We cannot relegate town employees to a system that they believe is broken without first fixing that system. To do so would be ignoring our obligations as an employer, ignoring the real concerns already raised by current and former town staff, and potentially court legal disaster. I urge you to vote yes on referral tonight and to choose cooperation and deliberation over preemption and haste. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Benka, you will have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dick Benka, Precinct 14, speaking for the Committee on Town Organization and Structure, which by a 6-0 vote urges favorable action on Article 31. As background, the town now has in place, by default, a process that nobody likes for handling discrimination complaints. This has the CDICR investigating and making written findings. While there's been discussion of regulations under this existing bylaw, CDICR members have said they are not able to effectively carry out their responsibilities under that existing bylaw. And this has led to the efforts to replace it with 2 distinct approaches. One is the punitive version that was proposed by CDICR at last spring's town meeting as Articles 12 and 13, and that was referred back to CDICR. I'll refer to this as the Article 12 and 13 approach. There would be a new complaint committee with adversarial, quasi-judicial hearings and subpoenas to compel testimony and $300 per day fines. CDICR members have stated their intent to bring the same proposal back to town meeting next spring. The only debate has been whether to deal with fines through a separate home rule petition or just to incorporate fines in the proposed bylaw as before. The second approach is the vision manifested in Article 31. This focuses on the Director of the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, and on the non-adversarial resolution of issues, including mediation. It also recognizes the existence of other dispute resolution structures within the town and the schools. So what are the differences that led CTOS to favor Article 31? First, Article 31 puts responsibility for investigating and seeking to resolve many complaints in the hands of the director and staff. All are full-time professionals, the director with more than 30 years of experience, including mediation, as opposed to expecting volunteers to deal with the adjudicatory and punitive responsibilities that Articles 12 and 13 would impose. Second, Article 31 avoids duplicative processes, particularly regarding complaints involving town and school employees. Articles 12 and 13 would have complaint committee investigations, subpoenas, and adjudicatory hearings taking place at the same time as parallel investigations by the Human Relations Department, Police Complaint Procedure, or the Public Schools Human Resources Office. Article 31, in contrast, has the director routing such complaints to the applicable existing process, and therefore avoids the potential for disparate outcomes within competing town and school procedures. Third, Article 31, unlike 12 and 13, does not present problems of legality and inequity. Under the Massachusetts Constitution, the fines that are the mainstay of Articles 12 and 13 could be imposed at most against businesses licensed by the town. We could therefore see $300 per day fines accrue against a local pizza parlor, but there would be no fines at all against a bank with widespread discriminatory lending practices or a large landlord that broadly discriminated on the basis of race or family status. Moreover, the issuance of subpoenas contemplated by Articles 12 and 13 is a multi-step legal process. Large businesses could lawyer up to challenge both fines and subpoenas under Articles 12 and 13 in a way not viable for local businesses. Fourth, Warrant Article 31 focuses on providing meaningful relief for discriminatory conduct by businesses or individuals in the town. Articles 12 and 13 fixate on the $300 per day fines, but those fines would go to the town, not the injured party. Even if an entity were fined at the end of the process, the victim seeking to be made whole would still need to go to the MCAD, EEOC, or another outside agency that could grant make whole relief. While outside agencies are still available under Article 31, the focus of Article 31 is the early mediation process conducted by a trained professional, a process that can include relief to the injured party without the need to resort to such outside agencies. The motion to refer Article 31 came up after the CTOS meetings, but this isn't a situation where CDICR wants to somehow improve Article 31. CDICR voted no action on Article 31 with the motion offered, quote, even if there are amendments, unquote. CDICR has also made clear that it is locked into the punitive approach of Articles 12 and 13. And here are some quotes. Just double down, just refile, not ready to compromise, go all in, resubmit as is, threaten people with fines, and again, let's double down. CDICR has prejudged the issue, and referral would be disingenuous. If you agree that the town should utilize its full-time professional expertise and existing town and school processes and seek to make victims whole, then please vote against referral and in favor of Article 31. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bastian, you will have 3 minutes.
Bonnie Bastian, town meeting member, precinct 5. Warrant Article 12 and 13 is not on the table here. Warrant Article 31 attempts to rest an entire discrimination complaint process on the shoulders of one man, the Chief Diversity Officer. This is a similar process to what we had originally, We are addressing this issue now, in part because that process was centered on one man, and it proved to be unfeasible and ineffective. We know this because folks began sending discrimination complaints to outside groups like Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity and Mutual Aid Brookline, because they felt they could be trusted to be responsive. When these groups are the ones catching discrimination complaints instead of the town, it's clear indication that the town doesn't have an effective or trusted discrimination complaint process. There are currently 2 other avenues for filing a discrimination complaint in Brookline besides the office and the commission. One is the town's Human Resources Department, which is an odd choice for a resident to go to with a very personal and sensitive discrimination complaint. The second option is the police department's discrimination complaint process, which is not appropriate for many discrimination complaints. This points to a critical need for a more independent complaint process that is timely, effective, and centered in the work of justice in the context of protected classes. The CDICR is a body in town dedicated to issues around all of the protected classes. This body, in collaboration with the Chief Diversity Officer, is a logical place to take a discrimination complaint. It's meant to be a welcoming room filled with faces of folks who work in the service of or are members of protected classes. The commission's job is a difficult but a critical one. They are there to protect the rights of residents. There have been many roadblocks thrown up against the important work that they are charged to do over the years. Article 31 is more than a roadblock. In my view, it's an attempt to put the commission out to pasture under the guise of mediating petty arguments between residents like recess monitors. Please do not vote to diminish the CDICR. Warrant Articles 12 and 13 from the spring were not exactly right and did not pass town meeting. Warrant Article 31 isn't right either. These things are complicated. Let's bring the petitioners of Article 31 in to join the work that the CDICR has been doing with town council to draft a viable, effective, and independent discrimination complaint process for Brookline. Please vote yes to refer Article 31 back to the CDICR. And if referral does not pass, then I urge you to please vote no on Article 31. No action on Article 31. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Granoff, you will have 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much, Madam Moderator. I'm Susan Granoff, Precinct 7 Town Meeting Member, Advisory Committee Member, a litigator who has handled cases involving discrimination complaints, and a member of the Advisory Committee's 5-person ad hoc subcommittee that has closely reviewed all the many revisions that Article 31 has gone through since September. Speaking just for myself, I'm here to urge you to vote favorable action on Warrant Article 31 and no action on the motion to refer it. Why do I support Warrant Article 31? First, because unlike the warrant article proposed at last May's town meeting, about which I and a large majority of town meeting members had serious concerns, Warrant Article 31 does not overreach. Unlike the May proposal, it does not seek to create from scratch a complex, very expensive, quasi-judicial administrative process for handling discrimination complaints, one that tries to replicate, but less well, what other state and federal agencies like the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination already do. Instead, Article 31 would create a sensible, fair, cost-effective, yet comprehensive set of detailed new procedures for responding to allegations of discrimination in Brookline. Second, unlike last May's proposal, which sought to push the boundaries of Brookline's legal authority, and as a result, according to town council, would likely to have led to years of costly litigation questioning its legality, the procedures and remedies that would be established by Article 31 are plainly within Brookline's scope of authority. Third, again, unlike last May's proposal, Article 31 doesn't assign the primary responsibility for conducting investigations and judicial hearings to a changing cast of inexperienced amateurs doing this complex work in their spare time for a few hours a week. Instead, under Article 31, all investigations and determinations are to be made by trained, fully qualified professionals who know how to conduct investigations while fully protecting the due process rights of all parties and who are entirely impartial and appear to be impartial. I actually questioned Dr. Gelano, who is head of the Office of Dicker, about whether his staff would be sufficient to handle warrant Article 31. This occurred at both the public hearing and at our public meetings of our committee. And he assured us that this would not be a problem. So the concerns that have been raised by some of the opponents are simply not justified. Fourth, the final version of warrant Article 31 that we are voting on tonight has gone through a lengthy revision process because the petitioners have listened carefully to the questions and concerns raised during the public hearing and numerous public meetings on it, and were responsive to these critiques. Incidentally, based on some of the comments that were made by opponents of warrant Article 31, I believe that some of the people commenting were not looking at the final draft of Article 31, but were instead looking at some of its earlier incarnations. So why not give this proposal a chance? We can always adopt a more extreme approach if this proves inadequate, but I and Dr. Gelano and many other people that you've heard from tonight do not believe that it will prove inadequate. As for the referral motion, it would refer warrant Article 31 to the very same commission to whom the May warrant article was referred to, and who you have heard have refused to revise it in response to any of the concerns raised by 153 town meeting members last May, and who simply intend to reintroduce it virtually unchanged at next May's town meeting. If Article 31 is referred, if Article 31 is referred to CDICR, they will just bury it because they've already voted against it and have not suggested any amendments that they would consider improving it. And it will be the same as voting no. So for all of the above reasons, I urge you to join me in voting favorable action on warrant Article 31 and no action on the motion to refer it. Thank you.
We have had a motion to call the question by Mr. Tuckman. Is there a second? Ms. Hummel has seconded it. All right, in order to call the question, and I will tell you who's waiting in a minute, we will need a 2/3 vote. The people who are waiting to speak in favor of Article 31 are Ms. Daly, Mr. Penzel, Mr. Levy. Speaking against Article 31 or for referral are Mr. Tamayo, Mr. Conquest, Mr. Stokes, Ms. Linos, Mr. or Ms. Friedberg, Ms. Caldy, Mr. Mabruk, Ms. Lula, and Ms. Ashkenazi. In line to ask a question, we have Mr. Birnbaum, Ms. Thal, and Mr. Homer. So
We have 142 yes, 89 no, 5 abstentions.
The motion fails with 142 yes, 89 no, and 5 abstentions. We will continue our discussion, and I will call on Mr. Tamayo, who will have 4 minutes as requested.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, also and welcome. I believe you're a new town meeting member,
Yes.
and you've not spoken before, so welcome.
Thank you so much. And I really am grateful for the minute request. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Carlos Mario Tamayo, Precinct 2. Tonight, I'm asking you to please vote in favor of referral, and if that fails, then no action on warrant Article 31. Conflict of interest disclosure. I'm one of the newly elected members of the CDICR, but since I have no financial stake, there is no conflict of interest. To date, I have yet to attend a CDICR meeting. My background is I am a first-generation American and college graduate from BC. I'm the proud son of Latino immigrants from Medellin, Colombia. I live in Brookline housing. An issue is that the director is solely responsible for complaints involving town employees, while the commission does not determine whether discrimination has occurred. This means that despite the presence of a commission, the director has the final say with regards to whether or not discrimination has occurred. This is deeply problematic. Why does one person in a room with 15 additional people get to have the final say? And who is this person and how will they be chosen? It doesn't make sense. It does not feel right. If the power is to fall in the hands of one person, then why else is everyone there? Can you imagine needing to work because, I don't know, you live in public housing like me, and you're on your way to this commission, which is an unpaid position, only to maybe be heard by the director? This excludes the group of people that this warrant article states it would like to be inclusive of. This is an equity issue, and it is one of the deep ironic flaws of this proposal. And if you think that this is okay, then you don't think that this proposal should include everyone, even though that is the mission of the proposal. In terms of the process itself, it's not enough to have experts discussing inequity and racism behind closed doors. I think that we can do better by giving people with complaints the podium, literally, to voice their experiences. I applaud the expressed desire of the petitioners as they strive to make Brookline more diverse and equitable. I too share that goal. As the son of an immigrant woman who doesn't speak English and who works in Brookline, I have to pause for a moment and reflect on everything that she's been through. Everything she was told when she was a janitor at a gym in Coolidge Corner, including having to turn off her favorite music because it made some people uncomfortable, and depending on who was working, some gym employees. Can you imagine just feeling like you're disgusting and unwelcome because you're Latino? Being threatened with being let go for listening to music in Spanish? How are you supposed to put food on the table peacefully when you're subject to this abuse and you can't do anything about it at your workplace? So yes, we need a process, but the vague aspects of this proposal hinder the shared goals of the petitioners and myself to make Brookline a more welcoming, safe, and equitable place to live for generations to come. It fails to center and highlight the voices of Black and Brown people, LGBTQ people, low-income people, veterans, disabled people, and elderly people. Because of the above reasons, and because the CDICR recommends no action, since they will be filing a stronger discrimination complaint article in May of 2023, please vote for referral, and if that fails, no action on warrant Article 31. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Daly? You will have 3 minutes. Susan Helms Daly.
Hi, Madam Moderator. I don't believe I signed up to speak on this article. Maybe it was Nancy
Okay.
Daly.
Oh, it's Nancy Daly. Okay. Nancy Daly, would you like to speak?
Hi. Nancy
I
Daly.
apologize.
Yeah, that's okay. Nancy Daly, Precinct 12. I think it is widely acknowledged that the commission has not been able to adequately deal with complaints that they've received. And this proposed change in Article 31, which would invest the director with the authority to investigate and deal with complaints, may work substantially better than the current system. Article 12 and 13 were very flawed. They invested all the authority with appointed citizen members, including wanting the authority to summon people before it by subpoena and the power to impose substantial fines on individuals and businesses. I find it hard to believe that the state legislature would bestow subpoena power on an unelected and largely untrained citizen group. The town itself does not have any subpoena power. If this group is not going to descend into a star chamber, hauling whoever it wants before it for nebulous reasons, they would have to establish clear guidelines about what constitutes a violation. Members would have to get some judicial training, not just legal training as lawyers, and have rules of evidence for their proceedings. And they would need further authority to enforce any judgments that they issued. Town employees who are union members and their unions have bargained over many cycles for various procedures to protect them in the event there's a complaint against them. And they are highly unlikely to appear before such a group. The town itself cannot reveal any information about investigations into complaints against its employees, because in addition to their union protections, they are also protected by state law concerning employees. So you would have a situation where you could publicly be airing a complaint from somebody about a town employee, but have no answer from the other side, which does not sound like a very fair process. Businesses who are the subject of a complaint may be very reluctant to talk frankly about the matter when any statements they make could be used against them in another future court proceeding. Letting the commission propose policy and signal concerns, but having the director actually work on complaints has several benefits. The director can work out of the public eye, which may result in getting people to open up about what actually happened. The director can also work with the town to work out problems with employees.
Could you please finish up?
Yes. I would urge you to vote against referral and to vote in favor of Article 31.
Thank you. Mr. Conquest.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Arthur Wellington Conquest III, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6. Vote no on warrant Article 31. Have it referred to the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Commission. Quote, to protest against injustice is the foundation for all American democracy, unquote, said former Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Article 31 is bad for the town of Brookline and bad for respecting humanity. It is very cunningly, it very cunningly stymies human progress, especially as far as racial justice is involved. Racism is America's first sin, and in this community going as far back as 1969, when the report of the Commission on Urban Responsibilities issued its 139-page report, leaders and citizens alike have found ways to circumvent addressing the virus of racism, discrimination, social injustice, and systematic inequality. How many committees and commissions have been created in this community proclaiming a panacea was being implemented to, quote, improve our racial climate, unquote? How about the 2009 74-page, quote, final report concerning citizens police complaint procedures, unquote, unquote? Then there was supposed to be a new day in 2013 with the dismantling of the old Human Relations Youth Resource Commission and the establishment of a new civil rights department named the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, as well as a brand new bylaw 3.12 to go with it. The aforementioned have all taken this community, and by design, on meaningless and unacceptable journeys to nowhere. And I ask, with whose pain and consequences but the town's minority, Black and Brown residents? Warrant Article 31 will do the same exact thing, and it will be another decade or less before an ugly and sad and shameful racial incident occurs, plus someone with an ounce of courage who will ask for an investigation and system-wide change. Everything must change. Nothing is going to stay the same, but change makes people uncomfortable. Change sometimes brings fear, discomfort, and even internal pain. The 6th of January 2021 invasion of the US Capitol was really about the fear of change in 2 terms of former President Barack Obama. But change is inevitable in every age and stage of life. Thank you, and again, vote no on warrant Article 31 and have it referred. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Penzel. Now that I finally pronounced your name right, you will have 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm muted. Thank you. Madam Moderator, Mark Penzel, Town Meeting Member for Precinct 2, Advisory Committee Meeting Member, speaking only for myself. I am speaking for warrant Article 31 and against any referral motion. By way of background, I was a civil rights employment lawyer almost my entire working career. I clerked for one of the old line liberal judges on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in the 80s. I worked for Civil Legal Services for 2 years in South Texas. I worked for 10 years in a plaintiff side employment law firm in New Haven, Connecticut. And I worked for 22 years for the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the federal agency charged with enforcing the laws against discrimination in employment. I give this background for 2 reasons. First, I think I also know something about how individuals can best go about vindicating their rights. Second, I'm a little annoyed at any language suggesting that those supporting warrant Article 31 don't support civil rights. So as someone who spent his working life representing individuals with discrimination complaints, I will say again, as I said at town meeting last May, that if I had a client with a serious discrimination complaint, as some of those mentioned here, I would never advise that individual to pursue a remedy at the city or town level. The town process will simply not get that person the relief they deserve. Nonetheless, I voted for the CDICR's proposal last May because I did not agree with some of its opponents' objections, and I respected the passion and feeling that motivated the proposal. When Bernard Green early on asked me, after CDICR's proposal failed, if I was interested in supporting his concept for warrant Article 31, I initially held back because I wanted to see what CDICR had to offer. When I learned that first,
Mr. Penzel, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Ms. Wu has made a point of personal privilege. What is that? What is your question of privilege.
Thank
Ms.
you,
Wu?
Madam Moderator. I made a point of personal privilege because there have been a couple of speakers. As I said, I am a newly appointed member of the CDICR, just joined. There have been a
Yes.
couple of speakers that have said that we are unqualified amateurs. I have the same Harvard Law degree that one of the speakers, Ms. Granoff, has, and 30 years of legal experience. I am not
Okay.
unqualified. Furthermore,
Thank you.
there's also
Thank
been
you,
a
Ms.
point
Wu.
that says
you,
we're
Ms.
going to
Wu.
just bring back the same article. I have no intention of bringing back the same articles
Wu?
12 and 13.
Thank you. We are now going to let Mr. Penzel finish his presentation.
Again, okay. When I learned that first, they were not going to offer anything this November, and second, they were going to wait until May to simply, in essence, reoffer the proposal that had already lost, I got on board with petitioners and worked through the advisory ad hoc subcommittee to make the proposed warrant Article 31 better. It is now something I fully support for 4 reasons. First, it provides an effective and meaningful avenue for the types of discrimination complaints where mediation, as opposed to an adversarial process, can provide meaningful relief. Second, like the City of Cambridge's process, it does not attempt to adjudicate or mediate complaints by town employees. Third, it gives the CDICR a substantive advisory appellate role to play. And last, it still allows the CDICR to hold meaningful hearings that would consider any systemic issues that it feels should be addressed. Finally, one comment about a misstatement from a prior opponent who stated that warrant Article 31 prevents the director from even expressing any legal opinion. That is not true. The language states that the director may not express a legal opinion prior to an investigation, which only makes sense and is no different than what EEOC investigators are told. I therefore oppose referral because it appears to be simply a mechanism to kill this worthy proposal. I therefore urge you to vote in favor of warrant Article 31 and against referral. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stokes? After this, I'm going to go to the people who have had some questions for quite a while or comments.
Good evening, Colin Stokes, town meeting member of Precinct 7. Select Board Ashkenazi, who we may not get to in the speaking order, I know intends to clarify something important, which is that it was her who initially suggested resubmitting the same article out of frustration, was not any member of the commission. All I want to say about Article 31 is this: the best way to improve our reputation for diversity and equity and inclusion is to show that discrimination has consequences. The best way to foster harmonious community is to show that discrimination has consequences. The best way to change the adversarial temperature in discourse is to show that discrimination has consequences. The best way to demonstrate credibility, knowledge, and expertise is to show that discrimination has consequences. The most serious, effective, appropriate process is to consistently deliver consequences.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Ms. Granoff has made a point of privilege. Remember, people, that points of privilege are urgent matters that cannot wait and need to interrupt the speaker because of their urgency. So, Ms. Granoff,
Yes.
what is your point of
Okay.
personal privilege?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify. I think Ms. Wu misconstrued what I said. I was referring to the complaint committee under warrant Article 12 and 13, who would have been trained, unexperienced people, not to the
Okay,
makeup
I'm sorry, Ms.
of the
Granoff.
commission itself.
I'm sorry, Ms. Granoff, that's not a point of personal privilege. Now, I apologize when we go back to Mr. Stokes.
Thanks. So the best process would involve consistently delivering consequences when there's discrimination. And if that is out of character for this town, well, that tells you something. Our reputation for diversity, equity, inclusion, that is among the population that matters for that issue, which would be people of color, LGBTQ people, people with disabilities, that reputation can only be damaged by continuing to disrespect the one body formed to represent those residents. And it can be further damaged by this dismissive attitude that's displayed by the petitioners and other speakers toward that body, which in fact does have ample experience, professionalism, and a track record of balanced judgments in the complaints that they have handled in their outside work. And then the claims that they're amateurs operating in bad faith and planning to resubmit the previous proposal, they're just unfounded. So our reputation can only be enhanced by sending this frankly defensive and patronizing warrant article back to the CDICR and giving them the resources and support that they need to polish their complaint process proposal so that it has real muscle and shows that discrimination has consequences. I think of it this way: if you were the one complaining, you would not tolerate being put through a bureaucratic maze under the guise of professionalism. In fact, you might even feel adversarial. But in fact, the real adversarial action is discrimination. That's the act of injustice that is compounded every time that we as a town collectively and our leaders treat it as an inconvenience to the town rather than a moral or even legal offense. So rather than focus on protecting our town from discomfort, let's focus on the discomfort of our neighbors and visitors who deserve equal and fair treatment. Let's make sure that they get it. And that will be the true community relations. Please refer this warrant article back to the CDICR. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another motion to call the question. However, I don't think we have proceeded very far in our discussion, so I'm going to allow a couple of people with questions to ask their questions before I will entertain another motion to call the question. Mr. Levy, you've been waiting patiently. Are you
Hi,
still with us?
my name is Mark Levy, Precinct 7. I reluctantly have to disagree with one thing that Mr. Stokes said, which is that the best way, the only way to end discrimination and rancor between groups in the town is to show that discrimination has consequences. That is certainly the sine qua non. You have to have a list of consequences over here and be willing to impose them when it's justified. But there's a funny fact, there's not a single person, if you ask them, in the United States, who will admit to having a racist bone in his or her body. I have one, it's a stapes in my inner ear, which is the smallest bone in the body, so I feel, blessed. But the fact is that sometimes the person who's discriminating doesn't realize he's discriminating. It isn't an act of ill will. It's an act of ignorance. It's an act of insecurity. It's an act of going along to get along. And those are the cases where I think sometimes mediation and restorative justice is more important than a fine or a legal finding that someone has broken the law. Certainly that's not every case. There are certainly cases where the intent is clear and ruthless and nasty, and certainly deserves to be slapped down as hard as you have the power to. But making nice is not the phrase I would use for mediation and restorative justice. For me, the phrase would be helping people understand each other and seeing if that both sides or one side will change its opinions and say, yeah, I did wrong and I have to do better next time and I'll pay a fine or whatever the outcome happens to be of the mediation.
Could you finish up, please?
Thank you. And, that's why I'm going to support Article 31 is because I think it's really a milquetoast article, but the status quo has been going on for too damn long. And I'd rather shake things up with a bad article than to have nothing happen until May. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One point of procedure to point out, since it's not obvious to people that when a vote of no action is urged, it's basically saying vote against this motion. So I hope that is clear. Mr. Birnbaum.
Hello, thank you, moderator. I just want to clear up something that's been confusing me here. I keep hearing it being said that the CIDCR is bringing back the same article with no changes. I think I heard a member of the CIDCR say that that isn't true, but since then, a lot of the petitioners have said it kind of over and over. Can someone from the CIDCR clarify if they intend to bring back the exact same article, or are the petitioners like what's the story behind this? Because it keeps coming up, and it seems to be pretty important to deciding what happens next.
Mr. Lepson? Bob Lepson?
Robert Lepson, CDICR, town meeting member precinct 9. Thank you, Lee, for that question. No, the intent is not to bring back the exact same warrant article as from the spring town meeting, not at all. In fact, over the course of the summer, there was ongoing work with the town council in order to improve the existing bylaw. And there's an absolute willingness now with the complaint process committee to collaborate with the petitioners of 31 to get this right, that we would all go back to spring town meeting and submit something together in a joint way so that we can get through the one article in 5 minutes, in the
Thank
spring
you.
town meeting. Thank you.
That would be a miracle.
That would be a miracle.
This fall. Carolyn Fall, yeah. You have a question?
I do. It's similar to Mr. Birnbaum's question, maybe a little bit more specific.
I'm sorry, introduce yourself, please. I
Oh, I'm so
apologize.
sorry. Carolyn Thal, town meeting member, precinct 16. I have a similar confusion because I'm hearing a few different things referenced. Mr. Leibovitz, for example, said the CDICR has said they will bring a new article. And then Mr. Lepson is stating that and saying that there's work that's been done. I guess it would help me to understand what work has been done if somebody could point to publicly noticed and publicly held meetings where there are minutes and an agenda showing that any work has been done, or that there's been any indication that anything other than what we have in the public record, which is statements that the same thing is going to come back. Is there anything in any public record showing
Mr.
that
Lepson?
work's been done?
Mr. Lepson?
Thank you again, Robert Lepson. Thanks for the question, Carolyn. Yes, there have been several meetings over the course of the summer that have been properly noticed with the CDICR complaint process committee, not the CDICR commission itself, but the subcommittee of the CDICR, and they've worked closely with town council and HR and others to try to move forward the existing bylaw, and then that process got interrupted with Article 31, and then things got put on hold. So that we can find that stuff. But yes, there were several meetings that did occur. Thank you.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion to call the question at this point, if anyone wants to make one. Carolyn Thal, you are moving to call the question? And Clint Richmond is seconding it. Okay, we have still on our list to speak against Article 31, Ms. Linos, Mr. or Ms. Friedberg, Ms. Caldi, Mr. Mabruk, Ms. Lula, and Ms. Ashkenazi. And the speakers in line or who have questions are Charles Homer, Martin Yassin, Danelle O'Neill, Ann Weaver, and Jesse Gray. So we will once again vote on whether or not to call the question and have a substantive vote on this issue, and it will take a 2/3 majority. Can you please start?
We have 188 yes, 45 no, 6 abstentions.
The motion passes with 188 yes, 45 no, and how many abstentions? 6 abstentions. All right, we will now move to the article itself and the motion to refer. We will first vote on the motion to refer, which I will describe in more detail in a minute. If it passes, that will end the discussion. If it fails, we will then move to vote on Article 31 itself. So the motion to refer would ask that town meeting send the subject matter of the complaint process back to CDICR for review and work, rather than adopting the motion that has been presented to you by the petitioners. So if you support the motion to refer and vote yes, the CDICR will once again begin its work or continue work on the article. If you vote no on the motion to refer, we will then go to voting on whether or not Article 31 should be passed. Majority vote? What? No. Yeah.
We have 100 yes, 134 no, 7 abstentions.
The motion to refer is defeated with 100 yes, 134 no, 7 abstentions. We will now move to vote on the article itself. The vote is on Article 31, a motion to create a bylaw or revise a bylaw setting out the complaint process for the Commission on Diversity and Inclusion and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, including revision of the complaint process, authority, and responsibilities of those bodies. We will now vote.
We have 150 yes, 81 no, 12 abstentions.
The motion passes with 150 yes, 81 no, and 12 abstentions. We will now take a 7-minute break and return to the issue of bees. Article 33. Thank you. Okay, folks, we are back. I hope you had an enjoyable break. Before we begin with the Bs, Article 33, Mr. Arthur Conquest has a point of personal privilege that he would like to rise to. What is it we can do for you, Mr. Conquest?
It says that the host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves. Is that, can you hear me?
Yes, that is exactly the way we've been doing it for the yes.
Oh, but I didn't hear what he said.
You don't allow participants to unmute themselves.
Oh, that's true.
So how are
The
you gonna-
host has to unmute you. You cannot unmute yourself. And you
Okay,
have to be
so am I-
recognized by the moderator to participate. So,
Am I unmuted now?
yes.
Okay. I'm confused. I'm a little slow, whatever, upside down. It said in the thing that you sent us, it says a motion to adjourn.
Oh, yes.
and-
That
and
was
the-
an
Yeah, go
that
ahead.
was an error, caption error on the very top, on the top.
Yes.
It said motion to refer in the large letters, and then in the small letters, it said motion to adjourn.
I didn't see something on the top. Maybe I didn't. So, but that's happened.
It was a mistake.
Yeah, but that's happened several times. And I think that when it does, it would be helpful if you corrected it and started over again so that slow people like myself can adjust, okay, and vote. Because I voted the wrong way, okay? And I don't,
If you voted the wrong way, then I would contact Mr. Kaufman, because confusion over what is being voted on is a valid reason for changing your vote. So just
but
contact
okay,
Mr. Kaufman.
okay, but in the future, it would be helpful if you just maybe stopped it and started over again, and stopped it, made the corrections, and started it over again, so that we could actually vote on what is in the message.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm going to fire the person responsible immediately. So we have to stop and adjourn. No, I am joking. Okay, on to Article 33, which is a motion to amend the zoning bylaws to allow beekeeping. The motion is made by Mr. Spritz and seconded by Mr. Green. It is found, it has been slightly amended. The amendment was to, I think, correct a citation in the chart of uses that is in the zoning bylaws, and was not a substantive change. The motion is found on supplement 1, page 1 of the night for supplements. So, Mr. Spritz, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Nathan Spritz, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 16. I would like to just correct one thing that you said. Beekeeping is already an acceptable use under Article 57. This bylaw change would only make it a little bit easier. And now I'll start my presentation, so thank you. Beekeeping. This is a very simple zoning change that's motivated by just 3 independent items. The first is that beekeeping is a way for people to interact with our local environment, but it's a particularly good way, as bees are good pollinators and they give us nice byproducts, honey and wax. Number 2, our current bylaw often requires a very expensive Board of Appeals process where the board itself, the ZBA, offers little to no added value. This bylaw would reduce the probability that a ZBA would need to get involved. The bylaw change would make explicit the current practice of currently relying upon the expertise of the health department to renew the license applications. And finally, this bylaw would never have been imagined had several other neighboring communities, including Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, and Watertown, considered and completed their own zoning and rules updates for the keeping of bees. There's a movement to make rules that more clearly allow residents to keep bees and in their cases also, and in their communities, also hens as well. I'm going to spend very little time on the good that bees do. Other people are going to talk about that. There are many kinds of bees, European or otherwise, already in our local environment, and they're all good pollinators. The only bees that this regulates are European honeybees. They're excellent pollinators, and they are docile bees. I hope that everybody will plant more native plants for bees everywhere. The last motivation is what finally got me over the hump to file this change. Everybody here knows that I was on BFAC, and I'm really in favor of good governance. As we work together regionally in pursuit of so many shared objectives, modernizing our approach to governance, learning from others' experience should be one of the easiest ways to improve our own municipal work and the intellectual effort that's required. Our neighboring communities in the last decade have made new rules to make it easier for residents to work with bees and chickens. Their experience has not resulted in the kinds of problems that require them to revisit their changes. So were we to adopt these changes, I would expect the same kind of success. Now, the real reason for this article. Accessory use 57 allows residents or commercial owners and tenants to keep any of a wide variety of animals, including goats and horses. There is one overarching parameter. It requires 100 feet of distance between any new structure and any residence. There is currently an additional requirement that this use is only permitted by meeting any requirements imposed by the Director of Public Health. 100 feet applies broadly to all animal types, and there are many places, there are very few places in our residential zones that are more than 100 feet from any residence. This requires essentially that all beekeepers would go through a ZBA process that includes public newspaper notifications, and that starts at about $1,400 since the tab is since the demise of the tab. But with professional drawings that the ZBA may require, that could exceed $3,000. This is all for the benefit of a board, the ZBA, that does very little and defers to the Director of Public Health before issuing a permit. The building department defers to the Department of Public Health because that's where the expertise is. Right now, there are only 5 currently licensed beekeepers in town, and there's no evidence that there'll be a flood of new applicants. But even if there were, the health department can throttle down permit issuance, taking the time needed to ensure that everyone is safe and that they do not create a nuisance. Remember, the health department already does this, and they are careful and can inspect every hive as required. This bylaw change only addresses bees by pulling them out of 57 and creating their own accessory use. If the hive, which costs about $400 and must be movable per the requirements of the health department, it's just a box on a pedestal. There's not something that the building department really needs to review. The planning department agrees. The building department agrees. The health department agrees. So if this passes, what will we do now? Everybody would still have to apply for a permit, so the 20-foot distance would be observed. Yes. Then they would give it over to where the health department where the expertise lives, and then they file an application, demonstrate their ability and knowledge, and present plans. The bylaw recognizes good governance and places responsibility and authority in the right place. The Director of Public Health is supportive. They can do the oversight. Let's reduce the unnecessary expensive meetings that only put wear and tear on staff and volunteers and put regulation in the right place. Thank you. And please.
We think we know what you were going to say next. So sorry if you were cut off mid-sentence. Mr. Richmond, you are our next speaker and you will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Clint Richmond, Precinct 6. Full disclosure, I love honey, but it's an expensive treat and I consume very little of it. I'm here to speak about the numerous environmental reasons for opposing Warrant Article 33. Domesticated honeybees are a non-native species. They were brought here intentionally from Europe, along with many other plants and animals. They've been bred over the centuries to produce extra honey. A typical hive holds 20 to 60,000 bees. It's very rare that a property can support a hive by itself, and certainly not any in Brookline. Honeybees forage for food every week of the year, except during winter, for up to 3 miles or more into neighboring towns, which already have honeybees that are already feeding here, as the petitioner mentioned, Cambridge and Newton, for example. Honeybees compete with native pollinators. Their closest relative is the bumblebee, some species of which are endangered here in Massachusetts. However, honeybees compete with all types of pollinators, such as butterflies, like the monarch. The large number of honeybees puts pressure on other pollinators. I spoke with a Massachusetts-based bee expert, and he has observed ratios on important native plants like goldenrod of 50 to 100 honeybees per native pollinator, 20 to 1 for bumblebees. 3, while I'm not against honeybees, they should not be introduced unless they can be self-supporting like any domesticated animal, so as not to harm existing wild pollinator populations. Urban beekeeping is especially problematic since food supplies are already limited and spotty. We first need to be increasing the quality and quantity of habitat for all pollinators. Unfortunately, as we saw with the tree bylaw, our vegetated urban land is under pressure and the quality is poor for native wildlife. We need to significantly reduce pesticide use on landscaped areas because pesticides are detrimental to the health of all insects, including honeybees. Note that pesticide residues can even be found in honey itself. We need to plant more native plants to support native pollinators as well. Conversely, honeybees help pollinate harmful European plant species that are now established here in America. 4, I spoke with, the expert I spoke with said honeybees provide no environmental benefits. They provide agricultural benefits, but only if there are enough native pollinators available, and that would only apply to large industrial farms found out of state. Our nearest farm, Allendale, is small and follows organic practices and has its own hives already and even produces some honey. But after the short crop pollination season is over, their bees leave the farm to search for food and so compete with native pollinators. 5, honeybees, like other domesticated animals, may be given antibiotics and their hives treated with pesticides to suppress their predators, such as mites. I would encourage you to purchase certified organic honey that avoids these chemicals. Honeybees harm the environment in other ways, such as the spillover of honeybee diseases to native pollinators and escaped bees forming wild colonies. We don't have time to get into all aspects of bees tonight, unfortunately. In conclusion, when I first learned about this warrant article, I was not sure how I would vote, but the more I learned, the more alarmed I became. And now, even though I am chair of the Green Caucus, I am disagreeing with its recommendation. Warrant Article 33 will increase the number of hives in Brookline, but we first need to think about the environmental impact. Do we have the required prerequisites for successful beekeeping with the hives we have? I don't think so. And if you agree, please join me in voting no action. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, no action means to vote against and vote down. But before we do any voting, we will hear from Mr. Green, who has 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Moderator. Good evening. I'm Bernard Green, a member of the Select Board and speaking for a unanimous Select Board in favor of Warrant Article 33. Mr. Spitz really gave a lot of the background information on this warrant article, and I won't try to replicate what he said. And Mr. Richmond's environmental issues are kind of over my head and probably over the head of most people here in the room or on Zoom. And I just have to go with what we've already understood at the Select Board. So what I'm going to try to do is give people a sense of, how this warrant article is structured, because I think sometimes that can be kind of confusing, but it is actually fairly straightforward. Warrant Article 33 would make it easier for residents to keep beehives by making the setbacks in the zoning bylaw less stringent. Beekeepers would still need to meet some setbacks, but would not have to locate hives 100 feet from a property line, which is almost impossible in most zoning districts here in Brookline. This would have important ecological value by hopefully having more bees to help pollinate flowers, which would be helpful in promoting urban agriculture, among other things. Now, the different types of bees, the different races of bees, I'm not going to address because I don't know anything about that. Warrant Article 33 would accomplish the above by a revision to zoning bylaw table, section 4.07 of the table of use regulations. And accessory use number 57 on that table by deleting the words, quote, or the keeping of bees from use number 57, thereby separating the keeping of bees from the other animals listed in the use 57, such as chickens and other animals. The article then adds a new accessory use 57A specifically for bees. Use 57A would reduce the required distance for beehives from 100 feet from any existing residence on other premises in use 57 to a distance of no less than 20 feet from any window, door, or other opening in any structure on any other lot. Sorry, that was a quote. In the new use 57A, a beehive would also be required to be more than 6 feet from any lot line, and it could not be in a location visible from the street. Beehives would also be subject to the oversight of the Director of Public Health with respect to numbers, location, and size of structures and enclosures, and the requirement that beehives have a current permit issued by the Director. I assume that the Health Department could also address some of the environmental issues raised by Mr. Richmond. Use 57A would apply in every zoning district, as does Use 57. After discussion of the article, the Select Board members expressed their support of the article and its goal to allow more beekeeping in town. This article, they felt, would reduce both the time and cost for being granted permission to keep bees. The Select Board was convinced that the Health Department, which can revise beekeeping regulations when necessary, would be the right entity to regulate beekeeping. Therefore, a unanimous Select Board voted to recommend favorable action on warrant Article 33 as amended by the petitioner and approved by the Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have my favorite question of the night by Mr. Lowe, point of something he isn't sure. Oh. Okay, I'm not even going to address that. We're passing on. No, excuse me. No, I am not recognizing you, Mr. Lowe. You have, I do not agree that you have a point of personal privilege. We will now hear from Anita Johnson. Be sure to unmute, Ms. Johnson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, Anita Johnson, Precinct 8, speaking on behalf of a strongly supportive advisory committee. As has been said, the purpose of this warrant article is to encourage beekeeping because basically they are critical for pollinating the plants in our ecosystem, our gardens, wildlife habitat, and fruit and vegetable crops. Bees forage from 1 to 5 miles from their hives, so that individual beehives provide benefits for a very broad area. There is an evident dearth of bees, and efforts to increase them would be welcome. As noted, this warrant article would make it easier to obtain town permits for beekeeping by separating this use from the other animal husbandry uses. It reduces the zoning bylaw beehive distance from 100 to 20 feet from a neighboring structure. It permits beekeeping in all zoning districts. It also requires that beehives be 6 feet or more away from any lot line and placed in a location invisible from the street. It makes it explicit that beekeeping is subject to the oversight and regulation of the Health Department, including a beekeeping permit issued by the Health Department. The reduction in the distance requirements on this warrant article, as noted, is consistent with recent changes in beekeeping regulations in Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, and Watertown. Now, in addition to this, the zoning bylaw, which at the present time requires 100 feet distance, the Health Department has a number of requirements for keeping bees that are not in the zoning bylaw and that are not addressed specifically in this warrant article. However, I wanted to give you a little bit of background about it. The health department is authorized to issue beekeeping permits once the building department signs off on the distance requirement. Some of the health department requirements for issuance of a beekeeping permit are the submission of a site plan, notice to property abutters, a limit of 2 beehives per site, 6 feet from the property line, a constant water source, and completion of a beekeeping training course. Beekeeping permits are required by the health department to be renewed annually. According to the public health director, Sigala Reese, the proposed warrant article and zoning changes would not change the department's procedures and have a negative effect on the department's operations. The advisory committee discussion included suggestions that the health department's regulations might be revised and improved, and that the Massachusetts Beekeepers Association best management practices is a valuable reference tool that would inform their work. Advisory committee questions and suggestions for health department regulations included: should there be dimensional requirements for hives? How should beehives on rooftops and multifamily housings be regulated? Should so-called fly-by barriers be required up front? Should there be a lot size requirement such as 5,000 square feet? Should
Could
the
you
health
summarize,
department?
please?
I'm sorry?
Could you please summarize? That's been more than 3 minutes.
These are things that the health department should consider at a later time. The advisory committee amended the warrant article to include the particular bee species and the term among others in the beekeeping restrictions that the public health director may impose. The advisory committee recommends favorable action on warrant article 33 by a vote of 21 in favor, 3 opposed, and 2 abstentions. Thank you.
Mr. Hyken, you are going to be speaking on behalf of the planning board.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Steve Hyken speaking on behalf of the Planning Board. You've already heard by petitioner Mr. Spritz and Select Board member Bernard Green the rationale and the details of this proposed change in the zoning bylaw. The Planning Board held a joint public hearing in October along with the Zoning Bylaw Committee, at which we heard those same reasons and the details of the proposed change. I would reiterate that the municipalities of Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville have already implemented similar policies to support and encourage urban beekeeping. Some of the members of the Zoning Bylaw Committee felt that there might need to be stricter health department guidelines before the zoning was changed, but not wanting those guidelines to be overly prescriptive. But planning board members who had some similar experience with this some years back in a number of cases involving the keeping of chickens, where that same 100-foot setback applies and where a special permit would still be required. We haven't seen, other than 2 or 3 of those cases, and maybe 3 or 4 years ago, very few similar cases. And similarly, we don't feel that this change in the regulations regarding beekeeping would create a flood of new applications. We do believe that the existing health department regulations are adequate. We also understand that the health director can amend those regulations as needed. And there was a motion to refer this article to the Advisory Committee on Public Health, but that did not pass. So in the end, the Planning Board unanimously recommends favorable action on warrant Article 33, and the Zoning Bylaw Committee, by a majority vote, also agreed that favorable action is the way to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Selwyn, you have a question for the Health Director, Sigal Reese. Ms. Reese, are you here?
Is she here?
I don't know. Yes, she's here.
Yeah, let me ask my question. It has been suggested, the comments that Mr. Richmond raised, it's the first time I had heard those, and it was suggested that the health director might be in a position to address them. I guess my question is, are there any regulations that fall within her purview that go to the issues, the environmental issues that Mr. Richmond has raised? And does she feel that it is within her scope to address them in determining whether or not to issue a license?
Madam Moderator, Sigal Reese, Director of Public Health and Human Services. I can't really speak to the question of the environmental issues. I am not a bee expert. This is one of the many things that fall under the health department, is a diverse set of permits that we do issue. I have had conversations with a lot of neighboring communities looking at our guidelines and thinking about our keeping of animal regulations and developing those. So that's something I think we would discuss in that process as we look to develop and engage with the community around regulations around keeping of animals, including beekeeping.
Okay, we've had a motion to call the question by Mr. Wyszynski. Do I have a second? I will say a second. Okay, I will say that we currently have only speakers signed up to speak in advance in favor of the article, Ms. Adrienne Bowman and Ms. Kaysen and Bettina Neufind. And waiting in the question queue is John Hebert and Mr. Lowe and Mr. Van Scoyac and Mr. Yassin and Mr. Levy. We are now going to vote on whether or not to call the question. 2/3 majority required.
Okay. 174 yes, 50 no, 9 abstentions.
Motion passes with 174 yes, 50 no, 9 abstentions. We will now vote on the main motion, which is whether to amend the zoning bylaws to allow the keeping of honeybees with different dimensional requirements, smaller dimensional requirements from property lines, et cetera, and allow it in every district than was previously required. A 2/3 majority is required since this is a change of a zoning bylaw for it to pass.
We have 182 yes, 37 no, 19 abstentions.
The motion passes with 182 yes, 37 no votes, and 19 abstentions. We will now turn to Articles 34 and 35, which are being discussed and debated together. Article 34 relates to the issue of whether or not a bylaw should be installed in the general bylaws that would require town meeting members to abstain from voting on an article in which they have a financial interest or their family members. Article 35 is an article that would establish a bylaw requiring town meeting members to disclose before they spoke on an article if they have a financial interest in it. Both articles are moved by Ms. Vogt. Rather, but the motions on both articles are moved by Ms. Vogt and seconded by Mr. Toffel. The main motion of Article 34 is found on Supplement 1, page 1 of your Night 2 supplements. The main motion on Article 35 is found on Supplement 1, page 1 of the second Night supplements. And we will start with Ms. Vogt, who will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I am Marissa Vogt, town meeting member in Precinct 6 and the lead petitioner on Articles 34 and 35. Next slide, please. Conflict of interest laws protect the public by preventing conflicts between an official's public duties and their private interests. Brookline's bylaws recognize that importance by mandating that town meeting members receive training in the state conflict of interest laws. However, though the state laws apply to most elected or appointed town officials, they specifically exempt representative town meeting members. Several other towns have therefore adopted bylaws requiring financial interest disclosures or voting abstentions. However, here in Brookline, we have only an informal approach. The town meeting handbook offers guidance that speakers should disclose conflicts or should consider abstaining from votes. We believe that Brookline should follow the examples of towns like Framingham, Belmont, and Burlington by creating a financial interest bylaw, which will be more formal, binding, and permanent than the relatively weak language in the handbook. Next slide, please. We are proposing 2 changes to our bylaws. The first, under Article 34, would require that town meeting members abstain from voting on an article in which they or their immediate family have a financial interest. Abstentions would not be required on the omnibus town budget vote or on departmental budgets, despite the inclusion of a line item in which a town meeting member has a financial interest. The second, under Article 35, would require that all speakers at town meeting, whether a town meeting member or not, begin their remarks by disclosing any financial interest that they or their immediate family members have in an article. Both articles refer to state law for the established meaning of financial interest and provide exemptions if a financial interest is shared with at least 10% of the town or of a town precinct. Both articles clarify that failure to comply with the bylaw will not incur a penalty and will not affect the validity of a town meeting vote. Next slide, please. Many of you have asked, under what circumstances would I be required to make a disclosure or abstain? Our bylaw refers to state law to help answer this question. Earlier this week, we shared a set of example scenarios with some examples shown here on this slide. While state laws are not prescriptive as to what constitutes a financial interest, they do provide the basis for several other resources that can help town meeting members understand their obligations. In particular, town council's office will be available to answer questions about whether a town meeting member's individual circumstances constitute a financial interest in future articles. Next slide, please. Adding a financial interest policy to our bylaws follows the example of many other towns that require abstentions or disclosures in their town bylaws or town charter. We are not reinventing the wheel here. Our language is modified slightly from Framingham's bylaw, and our proposals are significantly more relaxed than the state law that applies to other elected and appointed officials. Next slide, please. Finally, I realize that these abstention and disclosure requirements can feel uncomfortable for many town meeting members, particularly in our role of representing residents in our precincts. However, I think it is important to recognize that the abstention requirements in Article 34 are less restrictive than what state law imposes on town councils, on town and city councilors who are elected to represent individual districts. And fundamentally, I would encourage us to approach this not from a town meeting member's perspective of requiring abstentions means I can't represent my constituents, but instead to think about how a resident would feel, asking themselves, was my town meeting member's vote influenced by their financial interest? The integrity of what we do here in town meeting depends on us collectively agreeing that we as town meeting members should be representing our constituents and not our own private interests. Conflict of interest rules apply to virtually everyone else involved in Brookline's town government. So why are we so afraid to collectively agree to hold ourselves to this basic ethical standard? Next slide, please. In summary, Articles 34 and 35 follow the example of many other towns in creating a financial interest bylaw. They apply established principles and definitions from the state conflict of interest laws to town meeting. Town meeting members seeking to comply with these requirements can consult town council or resources available from the State Ethics Commission. The bylaw requirements have reasonable exemptions and are overall more relaxed than state law. We are not proposing any radical new ideas here. These are fundamental ethics rules that ensure integrity and increase public confidence in town meeting, and we believe these rules belong in our bylaws. Please join us in voting yes on Articles 34 and 35.
Thank you, Ms. Vogt. Mr. Waschinsky, you are up next and you have 5 minutes as well.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Neil Waschinsky, Precinct 5, and I'm speaking to urge a no vote on both Articles 34 and 35. As you heard, Article 30, the articles attempt to codify with more specificity a norm for disclosure that the moderator has written into the town meeting members handbook. It's been there for at least a decade and has served us well. I can understand how in this age of Trump, operating with merely a norm may not satisfy some, but I don't see that we have a problem big enough to require us to change our bylaw, especially when the proposal extends this norm to also cover our parents, children, and spouse. I hope you'll join me in voting no on Article 35, but I really want to focus the rest of my time on Article 34. And here I'll use myself as an example of how things could work under Article 34. Many of you know that I was appointed to be an associate member of the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is the board that approves special permits and variances under our zoning bylaw. What you may not know is when I sit on the ZBA panel, I earn $50. The more projects that need special permits, the more I earn. I therefore have a direct financial incentive to increase the number of projects that need special permits. So should I or any other member of town meeting who's been appointed to the ZBA, and there is one other, be required to abstain from any zoning article that might impact the number of special permits, whatever the substance of the article? If the answer is yes, I think that's an absurd result. But as an aside, if we have a ZBA member who will be influenced by whether they earn an extra $50, we have a problem much bigger than whether they can vote at town meeting. What about an attorney who may have more clients due to a warrant article, which adds complexity to our zoning bylaw, or fewer clients when zoning bylaws are simplified? Here's a hypothetical. Let's assume there's a proposal to, let's say, install lights at Downs Field so the field can be used at night. Folks on Jamaica and Highland Roads, which abut the field, will feel very strongly about this hypothetical proposal. And believe me, that's an understatement. Now we have at least 2 town meeting members who are direct abutters, whose neighbors will expect their town meeting members to advocate on their behalf and vote their interests. Because the number of abutters represent less than 10% of Precinct 5, those abutting town meeting members could be forced to abstain. Is this how you want to be treated on an issue that affects you or your family or your neighbors? If Article 34 passes, I believe it will introduce a new strategy to prepare for town meeting votes called how many town meeting members can we disqualify from voting? Imagine a controversial project which requires a town meeting vote, say the Baldwin School, or a rezoning at Hancock Village, or even a proposal to build a new school at adjacent to Emory Playground. I can see either opponents or proponents combing the town meeting member address list to determine how many town meeting members live anywhere near the project in question, and then making multiple points of order, trying to disqualify those members from voting. For most projects, less than 10% of a precinct will be adversely affected. Those direct abutters deserve to have their voices heard and their votes counted. What this boils down to is that Article 35 is playing with fire. It introduces the ability to weaponize conflicts of interest and disenfranchise advocates, their parents, spouses, and children. We've had a little taste of that during the climate change warrant articles. Imagine how that would have gone if, beyond requiring this disclosure, we could have tried to prevent the article petitioners and other advocates from voting. Please join me in voting no for both Articles 34 and 5. Article 34 is especially problematic and introduces many unintended consequences. We have to imagine how 34 will operate in the real political world. In that real world, I can easily imagine how it will be used as a tool for town meeting member voter suppression and divisiveness. Is this the fix town meeting needs? I say no. Article 34 is truly a solution in search of a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bors.
Good evening. Harry Bors speaking for the Advisory Committee. Warrant Article 34 is a voting abstention article, and 35 is a declaration of financial interest. Now, it should be noted that both of these articles no longer have a penalty provision. So in that regard, these now have the insistency of a bylaw, but the bite of an admonition. Now, Article 34 would create a new bylaw requiring town meeting members to abstain from voting when they or an immediate family member have a financial interest in an article. And the petitioners feel there is a need to ensure town meeting members do not self-deal with regards to issues before town meeting, that they should not be in a position to financially benefit from their vote. But keep in mind, town meeting members are elected voters and not special municipal employees. So they hold a unique position under state law and enjoy exemptions from 268A. Their votes represent not only themselves, but also their constituents. So prohibiting their votes by extension still may disenfranchise the votes of other interests or other groups and community members. Understanding, of course, that one should not use the imprimatur of the voters to advance one's own selfish interests. Now, the definitions and examples of financial interests are not always as clear as one might imagine under state law. While these conflict of interest laws may not apply directly to town meeting members, they are referenced for guidance in this article. So let me briefly quote from the state. Although the conflict of interest law does not define the term financial interest, the Ethics Commission has a long-standing interpretation of that phrase, and they provide numerous examples. Some are pretty clear, such as a select board member can't vote on a liquor license if they have a liquor establishment in town. Some maybe not as much. A town engineer can't be involved in a landfill if their home happens to be near it. And the petitioners also sent us their own examples in the last couple of days. But how do we want this to apply to town meeting members? If one lives in a proposed LHD or overlay district, should one abstain because it may affect their home value? And what if they simply live near it? Well, the petitioners say, yes, you should abstain. And what about any betterment project, really, streets, sidewalks, trees? Should town meeting members have been required to refrain from voting on the St. Aidan's development articles? Now, the petitioners, to their credit, insert the phrase shared with a substantial segment of the population. And it's an understood phrase, but it is still somewhat interpretive or perhaps contestable. Do we want to use a 10% threshold? Might this still disqualify some neighborhood members? The degree to which this qualifying language permits or prohibits a vote may not always be what we intend. And we've recently seen a situation where a town meeting member attorney advanced zoning legislation in favor of a neighbor. Now, the attorney was very forthright in pointing out that conflict, but could still be philosophically supportive of the change for various reasons independent of any relationship. Should they have to abstain? Well, interestingly, this article does not extend to neighbors or friends or cousins or colleagues, and it assumes that we know the business of our children and our parents. We all come to town meeting with vested interest, and we represent those of others as well. But what if the motivation is quality of life and not financial? Some things may appear black and white, and some certainly are, but many more are varied shades of gray. The advisory committee is supportive of town meeting members and others divulging potential conflicts prior to addressing town meeting. But Article 34 pertains to voting. And there is this concern that it risks being wielded begrudgingly or maliciously or disruptively. What may be offered in the spirit of good governance may simply sow seeds of animus. We are not convinced that the potential benefits of this article aren't outweighed by the potential for greater harm. And so the advisory committee is strongly recommending no action on 34. We do, however, support Article 35, which requires a speaker before town meeting, whether a town meeting member or anyone else, to divulge any financial conflicts. It serves transparency, allows us to use our judgment in calibrating and framing one's remarks, and is a simple courtesy to one's colleagues and the community members. And finally, given last week's tense back and forths, these articles and this discussion could not be more timely. Last week's consternations portend possible strife ahead if we are not judicious. We must use our best judgment in being fair and candid with our colleagues and the community at large, consistently and uniformly. At the same time, we must be respectful enough of others to assume that they have genuinely used their best judgment as well. So the advisory committee is recommending no action on 34 and favorable action on 35. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bors. We will now hear from Mr. Rosenthal, who has 5 minutes.
Oh, got it. I think I got it. Am I on? Sorry.
We can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Okay. You never really can tell when you're unmuted. All right. Marty Rosenthal, still precinct 9, still former select board member, and still for PACs against 34. And unlike my friend Neil, for 35, Neil W. Again, addressing a guerrilla issue, but one even more closeted than 31's, especially for the maybe 80 new town meeting members since November 2021. Please see me, the poster child for 34, also to show why it's also a poster child for, paraphrasing what we civil liberties advocates often warn, extreme isolated anecdotal cases make bad laws. My, Stanley's, and Diana's indemnity votes help me urge that even that doesn't suggest more than disclosure. I've admitted that our votes in November of 21 were, in my 44 years here, probably the clearest possible financial interest. But to say, like Marissa yesterday and tonight says, town meeting members should be representing our constituents, not our own private interests, is both a false dichotomy and a non sequitur. For yes on 31. For background, especially for the new town meeting members, here's the truth and the whole truth. December of 2015 came the 55-page Alston complaint with allegations from the 1800s. 7 paragraphs mentioned Stanley, including misrepresentations about the advisory committee settlement rule. It was never disputed that he was sued as a twofold town official. Only 3 paragraphs alleged his acts, 2 trivial. Only the 3rd later was pressed in Alston's appeal. Maybe a two-minute town hall conversation about the then 4-year-old Alston dispute. Maybe 2 sentences with a fellow town meeting member and a resident. The alleged details are still disputed, but for 6 court years, they didn't really matter, nor that some people falsely assumed he had said something stupid. 5 judges ruled if the allegations were true, the suit was frivolous. And by the way, far stupider things have been indemnified. Stanley obviously needed separate counsel, like many conspiracy cases with finger pointing and distancing, therefore conflicting interests. We promptly went to the board for discretionary bylaw indemnity, unaware that our voters in the early 80s, by a 2-to-1 ballot vote, accepted Chapter 258, Section 13, mandatory indemnity. The board 2-to-1 to 2 denied it, supposedly because he was not acting as a town official for his alleged conduct. That is, in town hall discussing Alston. But our courts say that scope of employment is broadly construed to encourage public service. We tried again after 2018's dismissal. His fees then 90,000, and we were offered only 10,000. Stanley, then 83, was so upset and physically ill that he retired after 3 Herculean decades on the advisory committee. By November of 21, he'd paid us about 170,000, later deemed perfectly reasonable by the advisory committee motion's neutral retired judge. So when Alston was getting 11 million, 3 select board members graciously agreed to add our article to the warrant, which the AC improved and recommended 26-1. So here's we get to finally slide number 1. The opposition was loud, fierce, and misleading. They sent this guide to town meeting members, notably, slide 2, please, notably led by 2 select board members. And then see my marked up slide number
Okay.
3 in
Do
terms
not,
of what,
Mr.
I'm sorry?
Yes, I do not want you to dwell on the previous slide. I believe it was improper.
Well, I respectfully disagree, but I'm done with it anyway. The debate was very similar, with, as always, equal sides speaking, many hostile questions, but before voting, what Zoom makes fully unpredictable, I called them, and as lawyers' ethics mandates, I advised them we should all vote. All of that's for my first imminent question in a minute. My second question's been discussed endlessly in the listserv, and I'll leave it to others as to what are the outer limits of financial interest and won't it be weaponized. But that, in my view, is the twofold strongest arguments to vote no. And it's surely the reason why town meeting members are explicitly exempted from state conflict laws. And finally, there's a poli-sci issue, which has been alluded to. After full disclosure, town meeting then decides if the town's and petitioner's interests really diverge. All town meeting members should decide that. But how about all our constituents, like first, petitioners' personal friends, and second, how about all of you and town government who benefited from that vote's precedent for town officials? So see slide number 4, please, what Lexington's TMMA says about elected voters, which I think it's Harry that mentioned. So my 3 questions.
And could you please finish up, Mr. Rosenthal?
I am. The 3 questions are simple. If you're unsure that, like I assume the petitioners, you at age 85 have been purer than us, than Caesar's wife, or slide 5, than Hamlet's Ophelia, then vote no. But even if you're sure you'd abstain, is financial interest breadth clear? If not, vote no. And third, even if you say that yes, as an elected voter, your constituents really deserve your abdication, like those wanting restorative justice for Stanley, or those who feel denying indemnity would be a horrible precedent for our government, again, vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Linos.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Natalia Linos, Town Meeting Member for Precinct 6, speaking in support of both Warrant Article 34 and Warrant Article 35. I want to begin by thanking the petitioners for taking the time to draft these warrant articles and hope there's consensus among us that these are common sense articles. The purpose is simple: to move us from flexible guidance in the handbook around conflict of interest disclosure and the potential for different interpretations to a clear set of minimum agreed standards on the most important situation when there is a direct financial interest for an individual or their immediate family member in a decision being voted upon. Let me first focus on Warrant Article 35. Many of us are likely used to making conflict of interest disclosures in our professional lives. In my field, for example, when publishing any research articles, myself and other health researchers share information on financial support received for the project and disclose if we have any financial interests, for example, serving on the board of a pharmaceutical company. During this town meeting, there have been several moments when people prepared and modeled very clear conflict of interest statements, and I think many of us applauded that initiative shown. There were also moments when individuals were asked on the spot to share a conflict of interest declaration and may have found themselves surprised unprepared, or singled out by the request. This wasn't ideal, and in fact, tonight's warrant articles can create the clarity we need. And let me be clear, the disclosures we have heard thus far during town meeting, including those tonight by CDICR members, those last week by some of the ZIAB members, went above and beyond what is being requested and required or even discussed tonight, because in none of those cases was there a financial interest involved. Requiring disclosure in the rare cases when there is a direct financial interest for a town meeting member or their immediate family member should not be controversial, and I hope there will be unanimous support for warrant Article 35. Turning now to warrant Article 34, which would require that town meeting members abstain from voting on an article in which they or their immediate family member had a financial interest. There has been some more debate, and we have heard some tonight. I personally believe that this warrant article is critical for the integrity and trust of the democratic system, and I would weigh that risk, the risk to the town meeting as a whole, our body, threats to good governance, as more serious as the risk of disenfranchisement, especially given how big we are as a body, and that, you know, each precinct has a number of town meeting members representing them. So it's not a one-to-one correspondence that that entire voting body would have no one representing them. They would have in precinct 6, where I am, another 14 town meeting members. So I don't think that risk is really as significant as we have heard. I apologize, my internet is unstable. It is telling me. If you can't hear me, let me know. There were some hypotheticals. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes. Yep.
There were some hypotheticals presented tonight. Maybe it would be appropriate for town council to weigh in on whether those presented would qualify as true financial interests. Threats under state law, for example, the potential of a project raising home prices. I think those are extreme. I imagine the answer is no, but I would actually welcome town council to weigh in, and also to weigh in on whether they would be available to answer these questions. Because like other town meeting members, I am not a lawyer. What these warrant articles would require me is to consider what are my financial interests and to seek that counsel and to ask the questions. And I think that is healthy for all of us to be doing if we want to really be representing ourselves and, you know, the transparency that we want. So please join me in voting yes on both warrant Article 34 and warrant Article 35. And we have a common understanding on this bare minimum clause around financial interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Neil Gordon, Precinct 1 Town Meeting member of the Advisory Committee, speaking in opposition to Article 34. Unlike any number of our colleagues, I don't receive a select board stipend, payment for serving on the ZBA, pay as a police officer, or town retirement benefits. As a constable, though, the town paid me $790 last year to post various notices. But for COVID, I and my advisory committee colleagues would occasionally eat pizza paid for by the town. I have a parking sticker and park for free in the town hall garage. The value of what I receive from the town is about 1/500,000th of the town budget and less than 1% of my personal budget. My town meeting roots are in Andover, an open town meeting town where every registered voter is a town meeting member, where casting a ballot or raising your hand to vote at town meeting are distinctions without differences. Yes, we have representative town meeting, and for good reason, but let's not lose sight of our democratic heritage. Grassroots, hands-on, citizen-directed government where the right to vote is sacrosanct. We're elected by our neighbors, 15 per precinct, not 15 from time to time, 15 all of the time. And with 263 town meeting members, we're more like our open meeting siblings than we are akin to members of a small city council. In testimony before the advisory committee, an Article 34 petitioner stated that the proposed bylaw would have little practical effect since so few votes were close enough for their article to make a difference. In other words, your vote hardly matters, something none of us are prone to say to our constituents or to each other ever. By petitioner's own words, this flawed, disenfranchising solution in desperate search of a non-existing problem hardly matters, but it does matter. As Paul Warren noted recently on the PAX listserv, we must not trade or limit our democratic principles to achieve a goal. We need better reasons that have been expressed by the petitioners before we disenfranchise ourselves and indirectly disenfranchise our constituents. I join with my advisory committee colleagues and with Brookline PACs. Vote no on Article 34. Vote no while you still have a right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Toffel, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mike Toffel, town meeting member, precinct 8, and a co-petitioner. I want to thank town meeting member Linos, who I think said much of the arguments that I was going to lay out. This really is meant to be, and I believe is, a common sense, good governance set of articles. And you've heard a lot of opposition that I think have attempted to stoke fear and pose a lot of what ifs, and then they answer their own what ifs. But they're not the ones who actually get to say what is a financial interest that would require disclosure or an abstention. Town council is available to assist all of us. So I would encourage anyone in this discussion who has concerns to raise them tonight and ask town council what their advice would be. They're here, they're willing to help, they're able to help. They're the experts on this. It comes down, I think, quite simply. If you think town speakers at town meeting should be required by our bylaws to disclose unusual financial interests for themselves or their families before trying to influence your vote, then you should vote yes on 35, the disclosure one. If you think they should only be held to an option, really, as described in the handbook, that a moderator can change, then vote no on 35. Similarly, 34 calls for town meeting members to abstain on votes that would unusually enrich themselves or their family. If you think that's inappropriate, as the petitioners do, you should vote yes on 34. We should not be able to vote to enrich ourselves as in unusual circumstances. Remember the 10% threshold. If, on the other hand, you're happy to have town meeting members continue to be able to vote to enrich themselves, then vote no on 34. Like these are the clear decisions that you need to make. These are the decisions that your constituents will see you make tonight. The decision really is yours. And again, I encourage anyone with questions to raise them tonight of town council, hopefully, so that we can get clarity on any of the concerns you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Toffel. I do not encourage people to ask town council questions on any specific issues. If you have questions on a specific situation you face, contact town council outside of town meeting. We now have Mr. Lescolier.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is David Lescolier, town meeting member, precinct 11, and I would like to speak in opposition to warrant article 34. Regarding the proposed town meeting member conflict of interest bylaw, my confusion meter is wildly topping out in the red zone. Isn't it the case that a garden variety town meeting member, an elected voter, and as such, not a town employee? Isn't it the case that only if a town meeting member is also select board appointed to a public body, such as a committee, board, or commission, that they would be a town employee? These have been very confusing through the discussion that we've heard. Would this status also apply to town meeting members in the town meeting member capacity? Also, wouldn't it be beyond the moderator's scope to claim, as has been suggested during this discourse, that the moderator, as an officer entrusted with keeping order during town meetings, therefore would have the authority to evict a town meeting member for voting? In other words, to label town meeting member voting as disorderly conduct quite arbitrarily and with no recourse. I'm dismayed about a parade of warrant articles which are transforming town meetings into a hostile environment. So please vote no action on warrant article 34.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Mr. Gladstone.
Yes, thank you. Scott Gladstone, precinct.
Scott
Yes,
Gladstone.
right. No, Scott Gladstone, the town meeting member from precinct 16. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think that I'm probably the person who was alluded to in the AC report. I might be wrong, but here's the real story. So I had proposed a zoning bylaw change to legalize short-term rentals, Airbnbs. My interest started off when a neighbor was doing it, and but sub rosa apparently. And then I had a client who was challenged. We went to the ZBA. The ZBA said, no, our bylaw doesn't allow it. It was a major source of her income. And so I brought a warrant article. Now, I made full disclosure that I was representing somebody who was going to directly benefit from the bylaw. I thought that was the right thing to do. I also said that based on the experience of my neighbor, which I don't think would have been a conflict for me, just as somebody I'm representing that person as a town meeting member, that I thought that short-term rentals was generally a good thing for people. So that's how it went. I personally thought that I'm an attorney. I thought that the rules of ethics, as it applied in this instance, suggested, because of the appearance, that I should probably abstain from voting one way or another on the article that I brought forward. I can't totally remember if I did abstain, but I think I did. I certainly thought about it. Now, I think a lot of people go through that internal struggle themselves. And the problem that I have, I'm for sure voting against 34. And I can go to the Hancock Village story later. I mean, the town is over the 10%. We have hundreds of units coming in that are counting towards the SHI because all of us at precinct 16, the delegation voted against a deal that was a compromise. So, but and we're all interested in that, because we all live near Hancock Village. Anyway, but I also am going to vote against 35 because I saw even the rule we have in our handbook weaponized during the debate over the zero emissions articles, weaponized over something that turned out not to even qualify as a financial interest. And somebody planted in the acting moderator's head that there was a problem, and the acting moderator that night.
Okay, excuse me, that I'm going to raise a point of personal interest. We are
All right.
not going to
I'll move beyond
moderators.
that. I'll move beyond. But somebody brought to town meeting's attention this idea that there was a conflict which should sully the reputation in the presentation and the points being made by the proponents of that article, however you voted on it. And it was extremely distracting because most of the debate for quite a while was about that. And it turned out to be much ado about nothing. But there was this colorable taint because of it. I do not want that weaponized. For that reason alone, I'm voting against both of these. Thank you.
Thank you. There have been two people moving to call the question, Susan Park, and I'm going to assume that Mr. Van Scoyoc is seconding it. In line to comment or speak or ask a question, we have Ms. Smith as a speaker against the article. In line to ask questions. What? I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. You're right. And Mr. Spritz is in line to speak for the articles. Ms. Laura Baines Walsh, Mr. Michael Harrington, Ms. Wendy Friedman, Carol Hillman, Mr. Levy, and Ms. Kate Becker have questions. Okay, we are now going to vote on whether or not to stop the debate on Articles 34 and 35. I guess we should do it one article at a time. So, okay, well, they're being debated together, but you can combine them. All right, we're being efficient. One debate, okay, one debate, one vote to close debate. It'll require a 2/3 majority. Okay, we're clarifying exactly what is being voted on the poll, and it is to call the question and end debate on Articles 34 and 35. Really, okay.
We have 176 yes, 51 no, 9 abstentions.
The motion passes with 176 votes in favor. 51 is 81. I can't read 51. Can't read my handwriting. 51 votes no and 9 abstentions. We will now vote on the merits of the article. We will vote first on Article 34. Article 34 proposes to amend the bylaws, the general bylaws, to add a requirement that town meeting members abstain from voting if they have a financial interest in the outcome of an article. Majority.
Okay. 63 yes, 168 no, 9 abstentions.
Motion fails with 63 yes, 168 no, and 9 abstentions. We will now vote on Article 35, which proposes to create a bylaw requiring town meeting members to disclose whether they have a financial interest in an article before speaking on it. Now start voting.
Okay. 148 yes, 82 no, 10 abstentions.
The motion passes with 148 yes, 82 no, and 10 abstentions. We will now move on to Article 36. Okay, Article 36 is a resolution moved by Mr. Lebovitz and seconded by Ms. Hummel to appoint a moderators committee to review the town's pilot policy and suggest improvements. The pilot policy, as you may recall, is a program standing for payment in lieu of taxes relating to tax exempt entities making voluntary payments to the town. It is found on page 36.5 to 36.6 of the combined reports. And we will begin our debate with Mr. Lebovitz.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Alec Lebovitz, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8. Warrant 636 is a very straightforward proposal, and I hope perhaps one that is less controversial than some of our recent articles we've taken up. So Brookline's pilot program was adopted by the Select Board in 2007, and the last time we revised the design of the pilot program was in 2011. Town staff have admirably implemented this policy as it currently exists, but the reality is that in the past decade, new pilot reforms have been pioneered by other municipalities throughout the Commonwealth. Given the town's structural deficit and the recommendations of the Brookline Fiscal Advisory Committee that can be found in the BFAC reports that have been issued to this date, we feel that it is time for us to revisit our pilot program design and determine if potential reforms could be adopted that increase pilot revenues. Warrant Article 36 simply asks that a moderator committee be appointed to allow us to explore the reforms we might implement to Brookline's pilot program in order, as I said, to increase revenues, encourage participation in the pilot program, which is voluntary, and ensuring the fair treatment of all tax-exempt property owners in town. There are many areas that such a committee might explore for potential improvement, including the treatment of in-kind benefits by the pilot program, the tax rates and other inputs used to calculate recommended pilot levies, and how the town engages tax-exempt property owners and conducts pilot negotiations. The committee will be able to study successful reforms adopted in other municipalities and prepare recommendations for improvements to our pilot program. With our adoption of Warrant Article 14 earlier during this town meeting, we've already taken a strong first step towards pilot reform by adopting transparent reporting of pilot agreements. Let's create a forum to explore additional reforms and keep improving on what we have. The advisory committee overwhelmingly recommended favorable action on Warrant Article 36, while the Select Board recommended no action. I want to briefly address the concerns raised by the Select Board in their submission to the combined reports. The board opposed Warrant Article 36 based on concerns raised by the Finance Director regarding specifically language in the third clause of the to be resolved paragraph, which reads, quote, any related topics the moderator deems appropriate or helpful, end quote. Concern was expressed that this language could lead to mission creep and potentially interference by the moderators committee with the operation of the pilot program. The petitioners included this language, which is standard for use in many resolutions, to ensure that potential amendments that may have arisen during AC review and in front of other relevant committees would be within scope should they need to be adopted. Should Warrant Article 36 pass, the Moderators Committee would play no role in the operation of the pilot program. Their charge would instead be to examine other programs, identify best practices, and make recommendations for potential program reforms. I'm really glad to see that these pilot articles that we've considered at this town meeting have rekindled conversations about the pilot program, and I think that this Moderators Committee could act as a convening body and forum for town meeting to work collaboratively with the Select Board and town staff on moving us forward. And in that spirit, I ask that you please join me in making this collaboration possible, and please vote favorable action on Warrant Article 36 this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have Mr. Sandman. You're unmuted, Mr. Sandman. You have 3 minutes.
Hey,
Hello?
I'm unmuted, but I have to get my device here to let me speak. Is that better?
That's better.
All right, thank you. Speaking for the select board, which split 3 in favor of favorable action on the article, 2 recommending no action. The article really duplicates an effort that is currently being made by the newly appointed finance director of the town. And the majority of the select board felt that he should be given an opportunity to finish his work, and that it's unnecessary at this point to appoint a moderators committee. So therefore, the 3-2 recommendation is for no action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hummel. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, but I had requested 5 minutes and was told I had that.
Okay, you have 5 minutes and you are our last speaker.
Okay, thanks. So hopefully I won't make this final. So I won't repeat what we're talking about. I think it's clear. The committee's discussion, the advisory committees, sorry, Amy Hummel, town meeting member, precinct 12, speaking for the advisory committee. The committee's discussion of this article focused on 3 primary topics. First, we spent a considerable amount of time discussing the history and current pilot policy to help us frame the entire discussion. On page 36-3 of the combined reports, there's an abbreviated background of pilots in Brookline, as well as a link to the current pilot policy, which is really informative. And even after you vote, if you haven't looked at it already, I recommend that you do. But in short, what we learned was that Brookline has been a leader regarding pilot programs, thanks in large part to one of our past finance directors, Steve Cirillo, who created best practices training for the state as early as 1993, before he came to Brookline, and who negotiated some of our first pilots. This was really his project initially. Brookline uses a calculation to determine the cost for essential public services like those provided by public safety and the DPW, which is about 25% of the budget. And he identified that number, which is our current pilot goal, which has become a model for other municipalities. So the committee heard much more interesting detail than I'll can cover here, but suffices to say our practices seem well thought out and well executed. However, because it has been nearly 11 years since the policy has been reviewed, the majority of the committee just generally supports taking a fresh look at the program. The second area of discussion was the question of whether or not a select board committee might be preferable to a moderators committee. The petitioners responded to that question, and that the BFAC report had suggested a review of pilots to the select board, but the select board did not act, and so they chose a moderators committee instead. And it was worth noting, and we discussed, that the select points, the select board is under no obligation to accept each, much less all, of the recommendations put before them. That said, no one offered a compelling reason why a select board committee might be a better choice, and no one offered such a motion. The third topic of discussion was that the committee suggested 3 primary edits in an attempt to address what's the somewhat adversarial tone and potential confusion in the article as originally drafted. For example, town staff has done a commendable job managing pilots and brokering agreements for in-kind services. There was concern that the language suggested otherwise and could impact employee morale, in addition to being misleading. To address the issue, petitioners included modifications to whereas clause 8 to address the committee's most pressing concerns. Second, whereas clause 7, the article as originally written refers to statements the town administrator made without acknowledging that we have a new town administrator. So in order to avoid confusion or misappropriation of perspective, the committee suggested amending wording to clarity. And finally, in the resolve clause, the committee voted to change the word ask rather than to direct the moderator to appoint a committee, because the latter seemed unnecessarily adversarial. So with those changes in place, and like Article 14, the committee voted in favor. I'll give you the vote in a minute, but I will say that we did not have the opportunity to hear from the new finance director, who will negotiate pilots. So to conclude, by a vote of 20 in favor, 3 opposed, with no abstention, the advisory committee recommends favorable action on warrant Article 36 as amended.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike Sandman. You are making a point of
Well,
privilege.
yes,
correct?
Madam Moderator, I
Wait,
believe it's
clarif-
point of privilege. It may be a point of order, but we'll find out.
Whatever
In
it
any
is.
case, whatever it is, I'm afraid I had a temporary bit of dyslexia. I flipped I think I spoke to the select board's feeling that the new finance director should be allowed to complete his work to get into this. And then I think I then said it was 3-2 in favor of favorable action. It's actually it's 4-1 recommending no action on the part of the select board. So the little talk that I gave was correct, but the way I recounted the vote was wrong. Thank you.
For that clarification. We have a motion to call the question. We have one person who wants to speak in favor of the article, Mr. Toffel. But I will allow the motion to call the question if it's by Mr. Tuckman, if it receives a second. Neil Gordon. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Toppel. We've taken the motion for the question, and I apologize if you signed up in advance, but we don't appear to have a record of it, and I apologize. But we're moving to call the question. 2/3 vote.
Okay, 152 yes, 72 no, 10 abstentions.
The motion passes with 152 yes, 72 no, and 10 abstentions. We will now vote on Article 36 itself. The article, which is found on page 36.5 to page 36.6 of the combined reports, is a resolution to appoint a moderators committee to review the town's pilot policy and, if appropriate, suggest improvements. Majority vote will carry. You can vote now.
Got 187 yes, 43 no, 7 abstentions.
Motion passes with 187 votes yes, 43 no, and 7 abstentions. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn, should one be made. Okay, apparently hordes are making motions. Okay, I'm sorry. Who's the first person? Jesse Hefter makes the motion to adjourn, seconded by Mr. Richmond. We will now take a vote on whether to adjourn until Thursday, December 8th. Enjoy your day off. Apparently there is a movie, I'm sorry, I have to say this, at the Coolidge Corner Theater starring Michael Sandman, Ben Kaufman tomorrow night. And what is the subject of it? Star Wars Episode 4. Not to be missed, and since you don't have town meeting, you have no excuse to miss it. Yes, the articles we remain to discuss. We will be starting on Thursday with Article 37, the school budget review article. Then Article 38, relating to creating an Asian American and Pacific Islander celebration month. Article 40, outdoor pool feasibility study, and 41, affordable housing overlay districts. Now, can we vote on whether or not to adjourn? What makes you think this is going to pass?
Yes. 42 no. 3 abstentions.
The motion passes 188 yes, 42 no, 3 abstentions. We are adjourned until 7 o'clock Thursday, December 8th.